The panel, organized by the Political Science and International Relations Department and the Center for Modern Turkish Studies at Şehir University, on Mena. You think we could close the door, Deniz, maybe? For those of you who do not know us, Burhanettin Duran is the chair of the Political Science Department. He's on my left, and I'm the chair of the Center for Modern Turkish Studies. This, we hope, is the first of a series of other meetings on the region and on the transformation that's taking place in the region, which is shaking the whole area to its core. We believe that Şehir University has an added advantage in holding these meetings. For those of you who do not know, let me emphasize that numerous visits have taken place to the region from our department. Our faculty have been to the region since the beginning of 2011 for monitoring elections. Hi, Cengiz. Here to the front. I didn't think you would come, Cengiz, but you did. Thanks for that. Grand entry. Great. Yeah, okay. Yes, you all know Cengiz Candar. Okay, thank you for joining us at this last minute. Yes, since the beginning of 2011, many members of our department, Political Science Department, have been to the region to monitor elections, to take part in conferences, to actually conduct interviews with the leaders of the movements in the region. And only recently, we sent a group of our students, undergrad and grad students, to the region to analyze, to see the events there. And for that reason, I believe the speakers from our university and those from outside today will be able to provide us a good sense of what's going on in the region, as well as they will, I hope, I believe, will challenge some of the stereotypes that have already formed in our mind about the transformation or transition that's taking place there. Without much ado, I leave the floor to Dr. Abdülhamid Kırmızı from History Department to introduce the speakers and their themes. Thank you for coming. Before I go, I said without much ado, but I will do a little bit more ado. This is a very bleak Friday, and it's very cold outside, and our prep school students are away on vacation. And our graduate students today have an exam at 4 o'clock. What more reasons do you want from me to explain the reason why we have a little bit less than usual attendance in this conference? One more reason, I think, is that Fridays are the only days available, or this Friday was the only day available for us to hold this conference because of the scarcity of meeting rooms in the university. So don't be depressed, don't be, don't feel sad about lack of, or rather not having a lot of attendance here today. I think the quality will win today, okay? Okay, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for attending our program. Our first speaker is Sener Akturk. He received both his BA and MA from the University of Chicago, and he completed his PhD in political science at the University of California. He did postdoctoral research at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, and he was a visiting lecturer at the government department at Harvard University, and now he is assistant professor of international relations at Koç University. He will speak on East European revolutions of 1989 and 1999 and this Arab Spring, I guess it will be a comparative approach. Okay, the floor is yours, Sener, please.
Thank you very much. Let me turn on this. Maybe I'm going to use this one. I thought I would be speaking standing up, but this will work better, I think. Thank you very much. As the presentation suggests, the title, and a very brief presentation, of course, in about 20-25 minutes, I'm going to draw out some parallels between what happened about 20 years ago with the collapse of communism from Poland to Hungary to the Soviet Union, and what is happening in the Arab Middle East and North Africa today. As Professor Kırmızı mentioned in his introduction, I'm a specialist not of the Middle East per se, but of Soviet Union, post-Soviet Russia, and Eastern Europe. So I'll talk about what I know more and try to draw some parallels with what I know less. Would be, I guess, Tunisia and Egypt to a certain extent. And I'll try to bullet point each of the 7 or 8 lessons that I draw that I think lessons that are relevant to the Arab Middle East. The first thing that we notice about the post-communist transformation 20 years later is the very wide variation that we observe in where these post-communist countries ended up. From Estonia and Mongolia, both of them classified as fully free democratic countries, unlike Turkey, by the Freedom House. Both of them post-communist countries. We have, on the other hand, countries such as Belarus and Uzbekistan, also post-Soviet states, still at the depths of totalitarianism under Lukashenko and Karimov in this case. What explains the variation is the grand question of post-communist studies. You can find dozens of books and hundreds of articles as to why Estonia and Bulgaria ended up where they are and why Uzbekistan and Belarus and Moldova are where they are. But why did some become democratic and some did not, and what are the lessons of post-communism for democracy in the Mena region? The map that you see, I see that you have projectors on both sides, which is very useful, is Freedom House's Map of Freedom, 2011. What we notice immediately in the post-communist region, of course, I think you can still hear me without the microphone, I think, is the wide variation from the Central Asian 5 plus Azerbaijan, Russia, Belarus, classified as non-free, as opposed to Ukraine, Moldova, Macedonia, Albania, Armenia, Georgia, and a few other countries, all of them post-communist, classified as partially free. Turkey is in that category, but not post-communist. Whereas many other post-communist countries, Mongolia, here you see on the side, all the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, all the way down to Bulgaria are classified as democratic, despite the fact that they went through the same experience, similar experience, let's say, same experience for the Soviet states and similar experience for the satellite states of Eastern Europe. They ended up very differently. I would, and as you can see in the Islamic world, you have no democratic country except for Indonesia and Mali. One bad news of the, I guess, maybe counter-Arab Spring is that there has been a military coup in Mali. So of the 2 democratic Muslim countries we had until a month ago, we lost yet another one. So the only democracy in the Muslim world is Indonesia as of today. But I think this map of non-freedom is probably going to diversify in the next decade or so. And what I would not be surprised to see is if some of these Arab countries do resemble more the Bulgaria-Estonia scenario as opposed to some others who still end up as Belarus, Moldova, or Uzbekistan. So, but what are some of the lessons that we draw in explaining the post-communist variation? The very first and biggest lesson, by far, is the choice of constitutional design. Maybe you are already familiar, I am sure, with these debates, but in summary, I would say, big lesson 1, constitution making is a critical process. Choose parliamentarism, not presidentialism. Evet, açmadım. Onu mu açalım? Okay, fine. Then I'm going to turn this off. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes, great. So the first lesson of the post-communist world for the Arab Spring, I suppose, isn't this too loud then? I can already feel that something has dramatically changed. I thought I could do even without the microphone, no?
It's going to be a problem. Either they will arrange it, I guess. They can arrange it.
You can arrange it? Okay. So let me know when you did, because I already have a loud voice. I don't want to have a legacy of deafening lecture. Okay, so the first lesson is choose parliamentarism, not presidentialism. And constitution making, as it's happening in Tunisia today, probably in Egypt soon, is a critical process for that. None of the post-communist countries that chose presidentialism could democratize. This is the big tragedy of Russia, a country that has chosen a super-presidential constitution, and the country that implemented perestroika and glasnost and then descended into the authoritarianism of Putin era, getting worse by the day. Post-communist countries that choose parliamentarism, not all of them, but mostly democratize. Here is a very good comparison, Bulgaria and Russia. They started out with the same freedom ranking in 1993. Bulgaria was poorer, with fewer resources, less international support, bigger ethnic problems if you consider what was happening under Zhivkov with its large Turkish Muslim minority. And yet Bulgaria is a fully consolidated democracy, joined the European Union, categorized as free today, and Russia is categorized as non-free, not even partially free, in the depths of authoritarianism. What explains this institutional divergence, as Professor Stephen Fish and many other scholars have argued, is the choice of what is that? Choice of a constitutional design. Here you have the correlation between the strength of the parliament. This is also taken from Stephen Fish, Stronger Legislature, Stronger Democracy. Here on the left-hand side, you see Freedom House scores. 1 is full democracy, 7 is full authoritarianism of the Stalinist type, almost. And on the horizontal axis, you see the Parliamentary Powers Index, in which I also participated as an expert for Turkey and a few other countries. So what we see is a one-to-one correlation between the strength of the parliament and the strength of democracy. Countries that have very strong parliaments, Latvia, Mongolia, here on the x-axis, also ended up with the highest Parliamentary Powers Index. Countries with extremely weak parliaments in their constitution ended up with extremely bad democracy scores. Uzbekistan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others. So the first lesson is to adopt a constitution that ensures very strong parliamentary oversight and control of the executive branch to prevent any authoritarian resurgence. Because of the time constraint, I'm not going through all of them, but you can find the legislative powers survey. Here are 32, list of 32 powers that could be given to parliament. And in the post-communist countries where we have strong democracies, such as Latvia, Estonia, Poland, and Mongolia, these powers are given to the parliament, that the legislative can appoint the president. It can ratify treaties without president's approval. It can grant amnesty, so on and so forth. You have here a list of 32 powers that the parliament could have. But in authoritarian states, such as Central Asia and Belarus, as well as Russia, the constitution was built in such a way as to emasculate the parliament. Think of the Russian Duma. Duma supposedly could refuse president's suggestion for prime minister once, and then the president suggests a second person. If the Duma refuses again, president suggests a third person. If the Duma refuses again, Duma dissolves itself. All the parliamentarians lose their seats and have to run for re-election, but not the president. How powerful of a parliament is this? De facto, parliament does not have the constitutional basis for resisting executive usurpation of power. So the first thing to do, I think, is to create constitutions that really weave a thick web around executive power and make sure that presidents are in check if we don't want to run into newer Gaddafis and Mubaraks and Assads in these new regimes in about 10 years, as we have seen Putin and Medvedev in Russia. There are many reasons why presidentialism has caused problems for democracy in transitioning countries, right? We are not talking about the oldest democracy in the world. Of course, United States has a good time, but that's the exception that proves the rule. We are talking about countries that do not have a democratic transition and just transitioning today, such as the MENA countries. For them, we have seen these problems over and over again. I have a list here. I'm not going to go over all of them. Recurrent gridlock, crisis of legitimacy between an elected president and prime minister, the problems of winner-take-all, that you will systematically not have 49% of the population, minorities and others not represented, weaker political parties, rigidity of fixed terms, personalization of politics, weaker public institutions, more prone to corruption, lower quality politicians, subservient bureaucratic ministers beholden to the president, and creeping authoritarianism. Symptoms, all of which we have seen in Russia under Yeltsin, intensified under Putin. The second lesson, very much related to creating a strong parliament in the new constitutions, is to support political parties, not personalities. A mistake that the Western world did vis-à-vis Russia once again. You cannot have a democracy without strong political parties. And I could even say this for Turkey, probably one of the big problems of Turkish democracy is not having consolidated historical parties like the Republicans and Democrats. You cannot have a democracy without strong parties, government by a political party. Whether it's the Polish Solidarity, Lithuanian Sąjūdis, or the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, is much better than a government by a popular individual, even if he appears pro-Western and pro-democracy, which was, of course, the illusion of Yeltsin, a pro-Western, pro-democracy figure who has completely undermined political party development in Russia, never declared himself a member of any Russian political party, and today in Russia we have a political party scene that is in shambles, that is incapable of sustaining a competitive democratic environment. So support political parties, not personalities. I think this will also be a challenge for Egypt and all the other Arab democracies, not to rally behind a single strong-willed, apparently pro-Western, pro-democratic individual, but really building institutional structures with mass membership and roots in society. Similarly, we see in transitioning democracies, as Steve Hansen's recent book comparing Weimar Germany, Third Republic France, and post-communist Russia has demonstrated, in countries that are making the democratic transition, parties can only be motivated by ideologies. So we should not be scared of seeing ideological party build-up, because ideologies are necessary for party development in uncertain democracies, whether that be socialism, Islamism, liberalism, or any other ideology. So it should not be, whereas the catch-all parties, again, we have seen many examples of this in Russia. Our home is Russia, Nash Dom Rossiya. A catch-all party that was established just on a very pragmatic basis to rally up support for President President Yeltsin, even though Yeltsin never became a member of that party. Completely disappeared, was never able to create a societal basis for democratic development. So ideologies are necessary for party development. Lesson 4, avoid the ethnic sectarian trap of authoritarianism. I am pretty sure this will be very relevant for the Middle East. This is the lesson of Slobodan Milosevic, when there was a big, thank you very much, but I lost some time with my speakers, no? This is the lesson of Slobodan Milosevic when there was an enormous democratization movement in Yugoslavia, in Serbia, that we don't remember now. Milosevic stifled this opposition by stigmatizing and attacking Muslims of Yugoslavia, first in the Bosnian genocide, and then in the Kosovo campaign. Actually, first in the Kosovo campaign, which didn't explode at that time, in 1989, then the Bosnian War, then Kosovo again, and Milosevic remained in power an extra 10 years using a majoritarian ethno-sectarian nationalism against a minority. Today, Egyptian dictators or aspiring dictators might want to use the same against their Copts, right? We see, I was at a conference, I have told just about 2 months ago at Harvard, also on this Middle East issues, and 3 presentations, one after the other, demonstrated that what the press reports as popular attacks on the Copts are actually attacks motivated, supported, abetted by the military dictatorship against the Copts. So the military, Egyptian military, it seemed to me, is playing the same old trick of the authoritarian leaderships of trying to marshal some sort of majoritarian nationalism against the ethno-religious minority. In this case, it's Copts. In Yugoslavia, it was Bosnian Muslims and Kosovo Muslims, in order to keep its entrenched nomenclatura leadership above Egyptian society. So avoid the Milosevic scenario. Solution is to encourage political coalitions across ethnic, religious, and sectarian lines. Similarly, of course, on the economic level, of course, that we couldn't find, unfortunately, in Russia, is the creation of an independent bourgeoisie. You cannot have a liberal democratic system without multiple business groups, a diverse economic scene that is independent of the state. A homogeneous bourgeois class that owes its existence to political connections is unlikely and unable to fund opposition parties, newspapers, and civil society. And this is, of course, the Russian nomenclatura. Former high-ranking Communist Party officials, which we call the nomenclatura, the name list, the 1% elite of the CPSU, which then converted themselves into the new Russian bourgeoisie and kept what they had, a monopoly on political power, translated it, exchanged it for economic power. And the solution, of course, is to create a secure private property regime to protect the businesses from arbitrary punishment and confiscation by the state, and to create, if possible, a diverse bourgeoisie. Multiple business groups, not a monopoly, multiple business groups competing each other so that they can fund different political parties, different newspapers, different civil society organizations as the foundation of a competitive multi-party system. The 6th lesson, also that I draw from Russia directly, is to avoid, if possible, an ethnic sectarian minority bourgeoisie. This is the lessons of Berezovsky, Gusinsky, Khodorkovsky, Abramovich, all Russian billionaires of Jewish origin, the so-called oligarchs. Of the 8 oligarchs in Russia in the 1990s, 7 were Jewish. Why was this a problem for Russian democracy? Because bourgeoisie is the foundation of political parties and democracy. But if the bourgeoisie is overwhelmingly identified with a very small ethnic religious minority, then it makes it easier for authoritarian leaders such as Putin, which he did, to attack this tiny ethnic religious bourgeoisie and confiscate its property, destroy the economic foundation of a fledgling democracy, which both Putin did. I mean, Berezovsky had Gusinsky had an independent TV channel, NTV, criticizing the Russian war in Chechnya, exposing all of the egregious human rights abuses, criticizing the Putin regime, the apartment. What happened? Putin attacked Gusinsky, they confiscated NTV, they confiscated Gusinsky. Gusinsky is in exile either in New York or Tel Aviv, and now Russia doesn't have an independent private TV channel. The media conglomerate of Gusinsky completely collapsed and was statized. The same thing happened to Berezovsky when he tried to fund the opposition. The same thing happened just a few years ago against Khodorkovsky, when Khodorkovsky tried to fund an opposition candidate to Putin. And Putin could do all of this with extra impunity because he could use anti-Semitism in Russian society to frame these figures as Jewish oligarchs. And I think in Egypt, as I have heard, the wealthiest business mogul, and media mogul is a Coptic Christian, I see the same trap could be played out. A more healthier version would be if there were multiple business groups with many Sunni Muslims also in charge, because if liberal democratic parties only rely on what the dictatorship, aspiring military dictators describe as an ethnic religious minority wealth, it is not going to be a healthy foundation. It will be a tenuous foundation for an emerging democracy. And 7th lesson, if possible, and this lesson is the one that I will not stand firmly behind. The first 6, I will not change my opinion on them until you really give me a good reason. But for the 7th lesson, maybe Middle East is different. But what we have seen in the post-communist world is that you need a complete removal of the authoritarian elite, the nomenclatura. Because wherever there was some sort of a pact, some sort of a compromise that kept the nomenclatura as a class in power, you didn't get democracy. This is worse in Central Asia, of course. Nursultan Nazarbayev, the chief of the Communist Party of the Kazakh SSR, still the president of Kazakhstan. Islam Kerimov, chairman of the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic, now restyled himself as the president of Uzbekistan for 20 years. Azerbaijan, KGB chief, Politburo, inner circle, Haydar Aliyev, son, Junior Aliyev, I don't know. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, does it? I mean, his personality didn't matter for his position, so why should I remember his name? Still in power. And so on and so forth. Moldova, the nomenclatura is still in power through the communist regime. Wherever they did not, and the Yeltsin himself is nomenclatura, of course, but the liberal wing of the nomenclatura, but you look at the Putin elite, people with KGB backgrounds, CPSU, high-ranking, military officials are now in the Putin elite. Not having purged communist nomenclatura completely, they have relapsed into an authoritarian cycle. You cannot have democracy with the same people who implemented communism or Baathism for decades. Right? Yes, they might say, now I have reconverted into a democratic Belarusian nationalist or a democratic Azeri Moldovan nationalist, but I would really doubt it if these are the same people who have been the aristocrats of Baathism or communism for decades. Finally, and this is what we sometimes call, and I think I will have finished on time, hopefully, the last lesson, what we call the post-communism blues. Democracy does not create miracles. Be ready for societal disappointment. Disappointment that you see in Hungary, disappointment that you see in Czech Republic, in Poland, all across the post-communist world, where people are nostalgic to Brezhnev era and Khrushchev era even in some regions. Because if the expectations are raised to an unrealistic level, then they will never be met. Democracy does not necessarily bring economic growth. Democracy does not necessarily bring wealth or prosperity. Democracy does not necessarily bring more order, less crime, or less inequality. Democracy brings competitive multi-party elections and the ability to remove a dictator or an authoritarian leader if you don't like him in the next election. So, if Egypt succumbs into an economic crisis, turmoil, if Tunisian economy collapses, I don't think it will, but who knows, maybe it will. This is not going to be necessarily a fault of democracy, but there has to be some way of communicating this message to the population that democracy does not create, for example, economic. It might in the long run be better. I do believe that everything else being equal, democracies tend to be more economically, create more economic inequality, not necessarily growth, but equality than non-democracies, and some work has been done. Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate in economics, have demonstrated that India and China having the same situation, India did not suffer a single famine with millions of people dead after it transitioned to democracy in 1948, whereas China, of course, under Maoist dictatorship, have suffered great famines of catastrophic proportions where millions of people died because there is no free media, there is no free civil society or political parties to communicate these troubles all the way up to the Chinese leadership. And in conclusion, past and future, yes, there are authoritarian and democratic waves. I would be cautiously, very cautiously optimistic, having seen what has happened in the post-communist world. Unfortunately, democracy has been in decline for at least the last half-decade. I already told you in the beginning of my talk that Freedom House only recognized 3 democracies about 5 years ago: Indonesia, Mali, Senegal. Senegal is a non-democracy now. Mali had a military coup in the last month. So Muslim world only has 1 fully secular, democratic, pluralist country, and that is clearly not Turkey, but Indonesia. Luckily, it's also the largest Muslim country, so I guess that brings some honor to that side of the world. But, and we have seen similar, Hungary, a EU member, is sliding towards authoritarianism with its constitutional changes. Russia clearly went back. Ukraine is going back. Georgia is going back. So we have unfortunately been witnessing a reverse wave, a wave of authoritarianism against democracy in the last 4 or 5 years. Will Arab Spring result in democracy, or simply the Spring will replace one dictatorship by another, replace one un-Mubarak with a military dictatorship, or will it create a demonstration effect for other Arab countries, or maybe even, and this is too hopeful of course, even a Central Asian Spring? That only time will tell, but those were the, how many were they? 8 lessons. 8 post-communist lessons for the Arab Spring that I tried to summarize to you in about 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience. I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Akturk, for this informative presentation of drawing our attention to the East European and Central Asian experiences and showing us what to learn from them. Now we go on with Hasan Kosebalaban. He is a professor of comparative politics and Turkish foreign policy at Şehir University here. After graduating from the International Islamic University of Malaysia, he completed his PhD in the University of Utah, and he lectured in the States for 5 years. And he's currently researching and lecturing on the Turkish foreign policy and Arab Spring. He will talk about the transformative impact of globalization, the Arab Spring. Please.
Is it possible to connect to the...
Yes.
Maybe.
Yes.
Let's just switch.
I need that also for the...
Or the Mac device.
Thank you very much. I have 15 minutes. 20 minutes, okay. My topic today will be the effect of globalization, the impact of globalization on the Arab Spring, the Arab democratic revolutions and political change in the Arab world. So where we can locate globalization and to what extent globalization has played a role in causing or enabling this revolutionary change in now 3 and many other Arab states. So this is a big issue, and previously I have actually researched and published an article on the impact of globalization on the Islamic political identity in Turkey. So in this paper I'm trying to expand that framework to include the Arab world as well. It's impossible to actually read from the paper in this limited time, and it would also be very boring. So I will just basically put a brief summary of what I think globalization can fit into this debate. Hopefully it will come. Okay. All right, so is it visible? Is it okay? All right. Well, first of all, I don't take globalization as a causative factor. It did not cause the Arab Spring in any way, but it played a role in terms of enabling and empowering the social actors that were the main drivers of this revolutionary change. So this argument that globalization has played a role does not aim to take any credit from the people who were the main actors in the transformative changes that we have witnessed in the Middle East and North Africa. Nevertheless, globalization is an important variable, and therefore we need to, I think, explain the role of globalization and to what extent it actually played a role. First of all, for any political change, and democratization, as Sener also explained in his presentation, we need a strong middle class. I agree with this notion that the emergence of the middle class, emergence of a new society is very important. And that's an effect of modernization. Many of these countries have experienced modernization to some degree. Modernization has created certain effects, such as increase in education levels of people, increase in their media exposure as a result of education, increase in urbanization, so more people started to live in cities where revolutionary change can occur. City is the main location for any kind of revolutionary change. And modernization has provided those kind of effects. So in this sense, modernization has created a social mobilization. So the regimes, perhaps they themselves undertook this modernization, now had to confront the products of this modernization. And as a result of the education, for example, they started to become more critical of their life conditions, their social status, and etc. So this is an argument, this is an old argument, of course, first provided by Samuel Huntington in his classic book, Political Change in Changing Societies. And what is the argument is that there is this economic development, this economic modernization, creating all of these effects, and the result, people's political expectations grew. So people, members of this new social class, started to become, expect more from their political system. So economic development, creating this effect, then leads to greater political expectations, increase in political expectations, and then demanding the regime to open up, to change, etc. But Huntington's argument is that economic modernization must be coupled with, or must be accompanied with, a political modernization, or what we call democratization, in order to transfer these expectations into peaceful, peaceful mechanisms or institutions. However, he does not, of course, advocate this. The book is that the main argument in the book that he published in the 1960s is you need to stop or slow down economic modernization, and his target, of course, cases are mainly Latin American cases, because regimes are not prepared to deal with the effects of globalization, the effects of that are created by modernization. So it is not favoring an argument that would suggest that democratization is necessary, etc. But just opposite, he's very conservative in this book, saying that if we don't slow down political modernization, if we don't slow down, economic modernization, if we don't slow down economic aid given to these countries, then we will be facing a wave of demands from these people who are being changed in terms of their lifestyles, in terms of their outlook, in terms of their expectations. So let's slow down. And actually, this paradigm, which we can locate actually in the modernization school, is still very influential, even when we look at the books, for instance, being published today about the Middle East and Arab Spring. And I have some examples of this. For example, there's actually Political Order in Changing Societies, Huntington's book, and a book like this, Arab Spring, How Islamists Hijacked the Middle East Revolts. very, very similar argument. So you cannot deal with the revolution. You have to slow down the revolution. You have to perhaps stop it in some way. Therefore, the classical American foreign policy that has been in favor of the dictatorships grew out of this argument that is first put forward by Huntington. Well, of course, it's not the first argument. But in his later studies also about the waves of democratization, Huntington basically believes that democratization is not possible in the Muslim cases because of culture. So from the institutionalist argument that he develops in political order in changing societies, he shifts to a cultural argument in the third wave, and then he develops this cultural argument later in the clash of civilizations. So, but my argument is that the old Huntington can be invited back to this debate in the Huntington of 1960s, rather than the culturalist argument, but because this is precisely what is occurring in the Middle East, in both countries that are experiencing this revolutionary change, and also the countries that are not experiencing this revolutionary change. So let's go back to this debate and see where we can actually bring Huntington back to this this issue. First of all, modernization has created all of these effects, but modernization is not the only story. You also have another process, even a more revolutionary process, which is globalization. And globalization adds to the effects of modernization by empowering the socially mobile grassroots. So by providing them tools to organize themselves, to communicate, basically, to receive and also transmit information into and from the nation state. So globalization basically eradicates the roots of the nation state in some way. So by eradicating the nation state, it also eradicates or undermines the power base of the authoritarian regime. So of course, it is undeniable that the social media, for example, has been used to a very effective extent by the revolutionary movements or basically grassroots that gathered in the squares of Tunisia and Egypt, and it is being used by others as well. So, for example, when you look at the internet penetration rates in many of these countries, Tunisia has about 36% internet penetration. So 36% of Tunisians today use the internet. About 25, a quarter of Tunisian population has Facebook accounts. Okay, so only in 2000, the year 2000, the number of Tunisians who had access to the internet were about 250,000 to 500,000 in Egypt. Today, a quarter of Egyptian population has access to the internet. 36% has access to internet in Tunisia. So they are utilizing these tools to enable their response to the authoritarian regimes, and they were able to topple the authoritarian regimes. So these, the regimes can, of course, adopt a different strategy here, and this increase in political expectations may lead to a peaceful political change if the demands are channeled into participatory institutions. That was also a prediction of Huntington, even though he did not advocate that route. He advocated the other route, but slowing down the modernization. There are examples of this. There are some countries which try to escape, actually, the Arab Spring, such as Morocco, by opening up their system. Let's have elections for the parliament, but parliament would not be the institution that would form, that would hold the form a government that would hold the executive power. That would still be a monarchy. So parties should declare their, loyalty to the monarchy. But let's have these elections. So this is a limited opening, of course, and the argument here is that this limited opening will only increase political expectations because the expectations are now transformed by globalization. Globalization enables social actors to compare their situation with others, with other cases, and therefore, people are now more difficult to convince, and little bit opening in the political process actually leads to a even further, or opening, or if that does not come, then the regime must stop the opening, and then we go to the scenario 2, which is the conflictual political change. And, well, the regimes that did not open themselves to the political institutionalization or democratization had to face a conflictual political situation. That was precisely the case in Egypt, in Tunisia, even though the conflict did not result in a massive amount of bloodshed, as contrary to the case in Syria today, unfortunately. Nearly 10,000 people lost their lives. The transition to democracy was easier in Tunisia and Egypt compared to Syria. Libya is an entirely different story. So these two alternatives, the regimes today that are facing this massive transformation in the Middle East have to choose, in between the two alternatives, and which is what they are doing. And I think Yemen is another case where the regime has accepted that the fate, that is inescapable fate of democratization, and therefore, with a agreement with the former, dictator, the process is being handled more smoothly, but we don't know yet what would happen. So this is one, overall picture of my argument. But I also go in my paper into more detail about the effects of globalization on the Islamic political identity. And one effect of globalization is the transformation of the Islamic political identity, and I explained this in the case of Turkey, but also what's being experienced in Egypt, in Tunisia, and elsewhere is a similar story to Turkey, where the old structures of the Islamic movements cannot handle the emerging new generation whose expectations and whose definition of interests are much different from their previous generations. And I think there is an important effect of globalization on this as well. So by creating a different set of expectations, globalization creates a new generation of Islamic leaders. That's actually there is an ongoing actual struggle within the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood today, how to handle this generation shift while maintaining integrity of the movement. And in Turkey, the integrity of the movement was not maintained, and the new generation actually decided to go on their way, and therefore we had the current situation today in Turkey. I don't want to go into more detail on this, but with more questions, perhaps with questions we can go into a more discussion on this point. Thank you very much.
Hasan Kosebalaban, thank you for this illuminating speech. And now we are going on with our last speaker, Burhanettin Duran. He is Professor of Political Science and International Relations here at the Istanbul Şehir University. After his graduation from the Boğaziçi University, he received his master and doctorate at the from the Bilkent University. He was in charge of head of department of the international relations of the University of Sakarya. And he is currently researching and lecturing on pan-Islamism, Turkish foreign policy, and Turkish intellectual and political histories. And he will talk today on the meaning of Turkish Islamic experience in the new Middle East. Please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, my topic is the meaning of Turkish Islamic experience in the Middle East. But I must admit before, unlike the earlier presentations, my presentation is based on a work in progress. That's why maybe you may find some of my early observations and findings as speculative. You would remember in the early months of the Arab Spring, the uprisings were considered overwhelmingly secular. Many observers underline that these revolutions have not been organized and promoted by Islamists. Certainly, there was no religious vocabulary, and people were calling for dignity, democracy, and bread. But after the electoral victories of Islamists in Tunisia and Egypt, this early secular optimism has been replaced by a different argument. Islam is emerging as an equally potent force as democracy in defining the new order in the Middle East. Over the next decade, the most dynamic debate will be among the diverse Islamists, not between Islamist and secular parties. On the relationship between Arab Spring and Islamism, one might find out two opposite lines of thinking. Interestingly, both of them emphasize the increasing importance of Islamism in the region with a reference to the Turkish experience. The first line interprets Islamist electoral victory in Tunisia and Egypt as hijacking democracy or the beginning of a new era in the region, the era of revolutionary Islamism. Largely inspired by the stealth Islamism, hidden Islamism of Turkey, these new Islamists pretend to be moderate by adopting Western rhetoric and public relations method. A more sophisticated example of this line argues that Muslim Brotherhood is pursuing not the old pre-Erdogan Turkish model, but a new model in which an Islamist party gradually leverages its legislative authority to divest the military of its traditional power and target secular political opponents. The second line projects a moderate and democratic transformation of Islamism in the region. The concrete model of Islamic governance that the Tunisian El Nahda, the Egyptian Young Brothers, Iran's reformists, and other religious groups want to emulate is the AK Party experience in Turkey. For them, the AK Party represents an Islamic party that has pulled Turkey further toward democracy. Paralleling to these arguments, Islamist actors such as Rashid al-Ghannouchi or the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt declared their intention to emulate the Turkish experience to differentiate themselves from the Iranian and Afghan and Taliban examples. In this presentation, I will try to discuss the meaning of Turkish Islamist experience in the new Middle East with reference to two issues: the increasing role of Islam in the competition among the regional powers and the exemplary role of Turkish Islam for the transformation of Islamic movements in the region. Yes, we have all seen that with the Arab Spring, the entire region seems to be experiencing a profound transformation in the relationships between religion and politics. Actually, this transformation may take different trajectories, and Islamist movements should not be seen as monolith. For example, Tunisia's Ennahda has managed to follow a moderate way of sharing power with secular politicians and promoting a rather liberal form of Islamism. But on the contrary, some Islamists within Libya's Transnational National Council appear keen to establish polygamy. In Egypt, the situation is much more complex than that. Muslim Brotherhood faces challenges not only from secular parties, but also from Salafis who have rejected notions of democracy and modernity as anti-Islamic innovations. And I believe that the current trend in most Islamist groups seems to be in the direction of moderation and pragmatism, which are urgently needed to address to the economic problems of their countries. And also they need to establish an engagement policy with Western countries. And the Islamist parties are aware of the serious challenges they face as the inheritors of the broken economic and political systems. In a sense, we are entering a new era in the region where Islamism is giving way to a different kind of religious polity, which takes democracy seriously. This is what Asef Bayat calls as the coming of a post-Islamist Middle East, in which the prevailing popular movements assume a post-national, post-ideological, civil and democratic character. In this post-Islamist environment, Islamist movements would find it easier to strike alliances with secular groups and associations rather than within the same Islamist camp. Nevertheless, this is not the whole picture. I want to draw your attention to the interplay between regional powers, regional power competition, and sectarianism. The Arab Spring shapes the future of the region in a way that relations and alliances are becoming more complicated. Today, it's no longer possible to see the Middle East as divided between two camps, a moderate pro-American camp and a militant pro-Iranian camp. For example, Iran's position in the Gulf is anti-statu quo, while in Syria is defensive and statu quo-oriented. I argue that the changing architecture of security interests in the region encourages regional powers, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, to politicize their understanding of Islam as a strategic opportunity for their struggle of hegemony in the region. This leads to a further sectarian polarization between Wahhabi and Shia transnational politics. Obviously, you might say that this is not a new development. As we remember, in December 2004, Jordanian King Abdullah paraded fears of a new Shia crescent cutting across the Middle East. In April 2006, Egyptian former President Hosni Mubarak, most of the Shias are loyal to Iran and not the countries they are living in. These are the words of Hosni Mubarak. Yes, we all know that before the Arab Spring, authoritarian Arab rulers underlined the threats of Islamic fundamentalism and Iranian Shia threat in order to maintain their power while providing an excuse not to reform their political systems. In other words, the securitizing language towards Islamic movements have been used by Arab regimes. The references to Iranian ambitions are code words that they know will resonate in Washington. It will bring some political support from Western countries. But now, it's interesting to see the adoption of the same image of Iranian Shia threat by both Saudi-backed Salafis in the post-Mubarak Egypt and by Islah Party, a branch of Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen. They are making some references to the Iranian involvement in Houthi uprising in Saada province in Yemen, and again Iranian ambitious role in Sudan or Chad, and of course in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. Even Salafis of Egypt questioned the Iranian involvement in Sudan and Chad to criticize the Muslim Brotherhood for its reluctance in sectarian Shia threat in the region. Salafis are differentiating themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of the image of the Iranian threat. In my personal interview with Imad Abdul Ghafur, the leader of Salafi Nur Party, he made it clear that Egypt will be the exemplary model to African countries, and Iran has nothing to do in the region. The main difference between the Brotherhood and Salafis is the emphasis on the Iranian threat. From these findings, I came to conclude that some particular national and transnational characteristics of Saudi Arabian, Iranian, Turkish, and Egyptian Islams would matter in the new Middle East. Saudi Arabia is a rentier state, and it has always deployed sectarianism as a regime strategy to gain loyalty and force the population into submission. But in response to the Arab Spring, sectarianism became a Saudi preemptive counter-revolutionary strategy that exaggerates religious difference and hatred. Again, Tehran's influence in Baghdad, its nuclear policies, and a growing fear of an emerging Shia axis that is purported to link Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon are seen as manifestations of Shia transnational politics, sectarian politics. Through religious discourses and practices, sectarianism in the Saudi and Iranian context involves not only politicizing religious differences at the regional level, but, more importantly, creating a new synthesis of national Islam. All these national Islams has a claim of somehow strategic depth in their surrounding regions. This environment might have some similar repercussions even on the transformation of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt or Salafis. In the coming years, it can reasonably be expected that Egypt will seek to reassert a leading role among Arab states and to shape its combination of nationalism and Islamism in order to balance Iranian, Saudi Arabian, and Turkish influence in the region. Of course, when I speak here about the increasing polarization between Wahhabi Sunnis and Shia, I'm not referring to the essentialist arguments on the resilience of sects nor to the 7th century Sunni-Shia battles over the caliphate. Moreover, I'm not arguing that Iran or Saudi Arabia is acting only in pursuit of narrow sectarian interests on the international and regional level. But having said that, this increasing sectarian polarization between Wahhabi-led Sunnis and Iranian-led Shia can never be understood without taking into account the role played by the agencies much more powerful than the sects themselves. I mean, namely the regional powers. In this presentation, I argue that transformation of Islamic movements in the New Middle East would include aspects of conflict and interaction at the national and regional levels. With the fall of secular authoritarian regimes in the region, various Islamic actors will experience a complex way of challenges and interactions, which might result in a process of desecuritization. I mean, moderation, pragmatism, and democratization. But at the same time, resecuritization, sectarian threats, and polarization. This complex process of desecuritization and resecuritization in the region would create new transformations and polarizations which might differ in each national level. And it seems difficult to generalize now these findings. Then now, what's the role of Turkish Islam in this competitive religious environment? Is Turkish Islam ready for this increasing sectarian polarization? What's the meaning of Turkish experience in this setting? Actually, Turkish Islamic experience has several meanings for Islamist movements. First, they consider Turkey's transformation over the last decade under AKP as an Islamic example of coming to power through democratic electoral process with a certain economic success. Second, Turkey's image as a prominent and independent actor that can criticize Israel appeals to the very different Islamist groups from Tunisia to Yemen. Third, Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan's effective leadership resonates with aspirations for a dignified foreign policy. That was shown in Gaza crisis or in Davos in 2009. In the eyes of ordinary people, Erdogan has emerged as the most influential leader because Turkey maintains a critical and independent distance to Western policies in the region despite its integration with the West. Fourth, the Turkish Islamic experience has a symbolic and legitimizing meaning for the Islamist movements. But it seems that performance is much more important than the substance. For instance, Turkish understanding of Islam or its rhetoric of reconciliation with democracy under the name of conservative democracy is not important enough for Islamist movements. Performance and results are more attractive. Islamists in Turkey have been experiencing power, enrichment, upward class mobilization, and they have pursued successful careers in the last decade. Opportunity spaces within the public sphere have opened up for Islamists so that they have now reached the higher echelons of bureaucracy and become owners of large companies and media groups. More importantly, they have gained an international respect and have established good relations with the West. In my personal interview with Abdul Wahab El-Ansi, the General Secretary of Islah Party, he repeated the nice argument that all Turks want to listen. Turkish experience is the most attractive example in the Muslim world. But what followed in his sentences was more meaningful. We need the Turkish support in presenting our Islah Party as a moderate Islamic group to the US and international society. And there was no reference to Turkish interpretation of Islam as the model to be emulated by Yemenis. Even in Yemen, you might say your name is Muharrem, and people would ask you, are you Muslim or Christian? Still, after having said that, I am Muharrem. This might be partly related to the specific nature of the Turkish experience. The underlying theme inherent in the relationship between Kemalism and Islam has often been a notion of securitization. Kemalism securitized the issue of Islam and established a firm control over religious life through the principle of secularism. Yes, I accept Kemalist securitization is a dynamic and complex process which has two different and interrelated aspects: the inclusion of Islamist actors and the exclusion of Islamist discourses. In establishing an official and acceptable form of Islam by controlling the religious sphere, Kemalism in fact illegalized any autonomous existence of religious groups and excluded any Islamist discourse from the political arena. And I argue that Kemalist securitization is a significant reason for the impoverishment of Islamist discourses in Turkey. I will not go into the details of that argument, but this is partly related to my presentation here. Why I argue that there is a limited meaning for Turkish Islamic experience in the region. This is very related to the securitizing aspect of Turkish secularism. For example, Turkish political vocabulary does not provide new syntheses or formulations for such concepts as shura or sharia to advance a new Islamic political program which might produce a reconciliation of Islam and democracy in Egypt or Yemen. Even the Directorate of Religious Affairs in Turkey shies away from any debate about Sharia. And it has developed a largely secularized language to discuss religious issues. Here is the critical question. Is Turkish Sunni Islam, whether in the form of Diyanet or in some social political movements like Gülen movement, are capable of facing the increasing sectarian polarization in the region? Are they becoming a part of Sunni bloc, or can they be able to establish a new understanding of Islam which might address to the problems of the Middle Eastern people? This is very problematic, and it needs to study on that. Maybe to give another example, the AK Party's adherence to an Anglo-American interpretation of secularism is not legitimized within the Islamic movement by reference to some religious concepts like ijtihad, or even Ali Bulash's Constitution of Medina. Yes, to conclude my presentation, I might speculate that there is still a continuation of securitized understanding of Islam during the AK Party. And maybe with the Arab Spring, we might anticipate a process of desecuritization in relation to the expression of Islamic demands through Islamic political vocabulary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Burhanettin, Duran, for this fascinating and enlightening speech. Now, I guess we have, we began 15 minutes with a 15 minutes delay, so we have, I guess, 15 to 20 minutes time for questions. I wonder who might, okay. Here is one. Arkadaki önce.
First of all, I would like to thank all all right. First of all, I would like to thank all professors for giving us their precious time to share their ideas with them. First, I would like to ask Professor Duran this I think, very important question, which is, what is Islam and what is Islamism? Because this is very widely misunderstood in the West. They say Islamism is like the application of Islam. And speaking of political parties, such as, let's say, take the Tunisian example of An-Nahda. An-Nahda is considered like an Islamist party, but recently Rashid Al-Ghanouchi said that our program does not include Sharia. So if your program does not include Sharia, what does it make it different from other secular parties? That's my first question. My second question is to Mr. Akturk. He mentioned like number 3 point is the removal of authoritarian elite completely in countries, but he said that he might hesitate when it comes to the Middle East. Why? Why is the Middle East an exception? That's my two questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, the question on the difference between Islam and Islamism. Of course, when I say Islamism, I'm not referring to American understanding of Islamism as a threat, Islamic fundamentalism as a threat to the West. Yes, I know there are many variations for those who seek a kind of Islamic politics in their countries. I mean, you can find many differences between liberal Nahda and Salafis in Egypt. But still there are some commonalities, especially from Turkish perspective, that we can call them as Islamist. That is the sensibility towards Islamic principles and way of life. Maybe these movements are not trying to apply Sharia. Maybe they are not trying to capture the state power in order to apply Sharia, but still they have some Islamic intentions and sensibilities. And this is what we see in Turkey. If we just confine Islamism to the application of Sharia or the call for Sharia, in the near future, maybe we will not find any Islamist movement in the region. And that will blur the distinction between Islam and Islamism. Of course, Islam is just a religious observance, just religious identity.
The reason I said perhaps, and it's still one of my lessons, preferably remove the authoritarian elite completely, but in the Latin American experience that we had before with Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and all of these former military dictatorships being overthrown, it was found to be more useful to draw some sort of power sharing in the transmission period between the former power elite and the new democratic forces. And this was supposed to make the transition smoother, because there the idea was that if we completely exclude, let's say, the former Baathists, now I'm completely moving to the Middle East, if we completely exclude the Pinochet and the right wing in Chile, if we completely exclude the Argentinian dictatorship and its cronies and that class, they are not going to give away, right? They are going to fight to the last bullet. Whereas if we can at least include some more liberal members of the military dictatorship and the elite in the transition period, that might make things easier. So I don't know, that's why for the 7th lesson, I am not sure if the post-communist experience, where this is definitely not true, only where you had a complete removal of the Communist Party elite, you had good success, or whether the Latin American model of striking some sort of compromise with the old Baathists would be a better solution, especially in cases where the authoritarian elite is also identified with the ethno-sectarian minority. I guess Syria would be a good example with its Alawite basis for the Baathist party. Right? Because if the new democratic regime means excluding this tiny minorities in Iraq, right? Do you exclude the entire Baathist apparatus, which is enormous, or just the top-ranking Baathists, or maybe up to 1 million people who were implicated in one way or another with the enormous totalitarian system that Saddam Hussein built, or the Muhaberat and everything. So, I mean, you know, you can pick and choose. Clearly, the leadership has to come from the democratic opposition. Clearly, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or the, what were you saying, the other parties, Islah Party and Gannushi, clearly the democratic leaders have to be in the steering wheel, in the commanding positions, but the extent to which they co-opt include a few moderate Baathists, a few moderate members of the previous elite, is something that the Tunisians, Egyptians, and the Syrians are going to decide. And that's why I didn't want to put a, you know...
Okay. Thank you, Şener.
Thank you. I have a question for Dr. Şener Akturk. First of all, I really agree with you that it is a very worthwhile and useful exercise to draw lessons from the transition periods that some of the Eastern European countries went through, and some of them are still going through, in my opinion. And I agree with some of the lessons you kind of shared with us, particularly lesson 4, which is avoid the ethnic sectarian trap of authoritarianism and stigmatization of ethnic and religious minorities and so on. But I believe more should be done. For instance, we can have a look at the situation of the Christians in the Middle East. At the beginning of the 20th century, they made up the 20% of the population. And now they make 5% of the population in the whole region, in the Middle East. And by 2020, I think it's estimated that their number will fall to 6 million or something. So beyond stigmatization, there's a sharp fall. And of course, we cannot blame them that they're concerned about what will be happening afterwards, after these regimes change. We see what's going on between Christians and Muslims in post-Mubarak Egypt. And we also, after we see what is happening in Iraq after American invasion with the pretext of regime change again, Iraqi Christians, because they are seeking refuge in our country, they are seeking refugee status and so on, they have to leave because they cannot survive in their homelands and so on. And Syrian Christians also they are kind of seeking refuge, or kind of they're giving their support to the Assad regime because they're concerned what will happen to them afterwards. So I'm just asking, very quick, a short question, how can these measures, what sort of measures, concrete measures could be taken to avoid that? Not only avoid stigmatization, but also reverse that trend towards, to stop that fall, and because they are an important element of Middle East, and in a sense, we have to preserve diversity, ethnic and religious diversity. And a very short question about the lesson I have some concern or doubt about that. Avoid an ethnic sector and minority capitalist class, or that they, because I understand the logic behind it. But I'm just drawing on a Turkish experience. Even though it was never a declared goal of the regime, of the, for instance, Kemalist regime in the early Republican era, to support or create incentives for the creation or emergence of Turkish capitalist class, nationalist capitalist class, and so on, there were certain impediments created in the way of non-Muslim minorities, even though they are citizens, and they are barred from entering into certain sectors, they cannot have access to public sector, and so on. So there's a very delicate balance in all these societies. How to do that? How to support rise of Muslim bourgeoisie and so on, but not to bar non-Muslims or certain. So I'm just asking certain draw lessons from other experiences. Can you share with us? Thank you.
Thank you. The speakers reminded me that they prefer to answer after taking the other questions. So, yeah, Muzaffer.
Thanking you all for thought-provoking presentations. But my question is most firstly relating to the Central and Eastern European experience, that transformation of the transformation from communism to the democratization. I mean that the Şener mostly focusing on the internal issues, internal lessons. But on the other hand, what do you think of about the two things, that regional conditionality and then the international orientation, when we if compared to the both times, and in terms of the Central and Eastern European things, that all those countries, Central and Eastern European countries, that their political sovereignty and the territorial integrity are guaranteed, and it's guaranteed, especially military security is by the conventional forces in Europe. It creates a security umbrella for them to make it easier. The second one is economic and financial aid for those countries for the transitionary period. And the third one is relating to the institutional support, strong institutional support, especially from the European Union. And then when we compare to the regional conditionality and the international orientation to those, both in those cases, what will be your lessons for?
Thank you. Any other comment or question?
I didn't want you to be left behind. Actually, globalization and the Arab Spring are the two themes, the most correlated themes in media and elsewhere. You know, we keep talking about, reading about this coming of age of Arab youth. Youth born and raised in a different generation, at different times in the post-Cold War period, at different times than their parents, actually. And the most prominent difference being what you mentioned, that is this global cyberspace or virtual space and all that. But I don't hear about, or I don't really read that much, and I didn't hear it from you today either, any reference to the changing global structure, the changing global power distribution, the global movements like Wall Street movement, or what's going on in Spain, or what went on in Madrid once upon a time, remember, in the streets, and going on right now, having any impact among the Arab youth. First of all, yeah, I'd like to hear what you think about that. Maybe you could mention a couple of concrete examples, like, for instance, the American president, the new Democratic president coming to, actually Democrat Party, isn't it? The Democratic Party president coming to Cairo and making a speech and facilitating perhaps, or, you know, opening the way to some kind of change in Egypt in order to control the change that he saw was coming, or to start the change that was bound to happen or going to happen. So maybe a couple of examples. Tunisia, I mean, the global impact on Turkey. Why was it so easy in Tunisia? You know, it just happened. But whereas it's a very torturous process in Egypt. Was it because it didn't, globally speaking, in the eyes of the hegemonic powers in the world, Tunisia had no oil, not a sizable, perhaps, Islamic movement, etc., etc. Some concrete examples in what you think about the global structure.
Thank you very much, Şener Bey.
No more questions? Yeah.
No more questions. I guess we don't have time anymore.
Okay, so let me, it's on, I think. I'll start with, well, you didn't mention your name, but your questions. Nilüfer. Nilüfer Hanım's questions. Two questions I gathered, both the ethnic sectarian Milosevic trap, what I call the Milosevic trap, and what I referred to as the Hodorkovsky problem, having an ethnic religious minority having concentrated wealth. And I'm thinking of Copts of Egypt being the rich, the wealthiest bourgeois in Egypt being a Copt, and that potentially being a problem for liberals of Egypt because he's also bankrolling the Liberal Party there. First, with the first question, the Milosevic trap, yes, Middle Eastern Christian populations have been declining. Of course, nowhere have they declined as much as in the Republic of Turkey. No Middle Eastern country is as homogeneous as the Republic of Turkey, with almost no Christians, no Jews, no Armenians, no Greeks. I am, that's why, a little bit amused when I hear Ottomanism and Neo-Ottomanism. How can you have Ottomanism when 3 of the 4 pillars are non-existent? How can you have Ottoman identity without the Greek, Sephardic Jew, and the Armenian? You can't just have Ottomanism with 1 of the 4 pillars. That's not what Mehmed the Conqueror thought. I think that's not what Süleyman thought. So I guess the most homogeneous Middle Eastern state is the most secular and nationalist one. But who did the killing and the demographic cleansing of Syria, of Iraq, of Egypt? Was it democratically elected Muslim brotherhoods, or was it military dictatorships of an extreme secular orientation? Saddam Hussein, the pre-Saddam Iraq's massacres in Nineveh and elsewhere that drove Assyrians away, and other nationalist excesses committed not by popularly elected Muslim governments by any stretch of the imagination, but by military dictatorships of one kind or another. So I would not, but of course it is always the trick of a Mubarak or Assad when speaking to French and American audiences to say that if we leave power, these Muslims are going to come to power and are going to massacre our Assyrians or Copts, whereas the history shows clearly that it is the opposite. They have always used this trick vis-a-vis the Western audiences to say that this diversity is going to be destroyed when they come to power, whereas it has been secular nationalisms of the Baathist, Turkish, Pakistani, and so on, or of course in Europe. I mean, let's not start with that, from the Greek and the Spanish, who have destroyed religious diversity in these places. So I think the new democratic forces need some PR campaigns to make this point. And as I have heard, again, for scholars of Egypt, they have clearly assured me that it is the military generals who are specifically attacking the Coptic community to provoke a response from the Coptic community and then tell the Muslim majority, look, the Copts are attacking our military. Your military, the military that has established an authoritarian dictatorship upon your people for decades. And then they are supposed to mobilize the Muslim majority behind the military dictatorship. This trick is so old that it's cliche beyond measure, I think. But what needs to be done, and this is what Milosevic did, and lived another 10 years, and died in peace in Hague without being executed. If Mubarak couldn't manage it, Assad might manage it. It seems like he has the support of Assyrians, Kurds, all of the Alawites, right? They buy into this logic that if Assad is gone, we are going to be massacred. I think, I hope and think it's not the case, but if Assad plays his cards smartly with the French and Western audiences, he will convince them otherwise. Some of the migration, of course, is economically motivated. I mean, we can't completely overturn the tide of Christian migration from the Middle East. Some people simply willingly also migrate. This is also a fact. But at least a democratic government might stop. Ethnic, what could be done? Yes, you are true. You are right. Sorry, you are right that this was an issue in the early republic, and with these discriminatory policies such as the wealth tax and so on and so forth, ethnic minority wealth was eroded, and it wasn't good for democracy. And how could, but at the same time, it is a problem, I think, to have 7 of your 8 oligarchs from a very tiny Jewish minority, because then they will always be vulnerable to attack from the state. Social democratic redistribution policies. I mean, create incentives for other entrepreneurs to set up shop, to establish, you know, in Turkey, Anatolian bourgeoisie. I guess in Egypt, I don't know what would be the corollary. The Nile, the Nilean, yeah, the Nile bourgeoisie, and so on and so forth. Create an indigenous bourgeoisie that is apart from the Copts, apart from the Armenians and Assyrians. Maybe progressive taxation, right? Wealth tax was a horrible thing, but 45% tax would have done something similar to in a more democratic fashion over the long run. It could have been adopted, but I guess at that time, Inönü government didn't choose that. So those are your questions within the time that I have. Muzaffer, thank you very much. You know that in almost every major issue, I think domestic dynamic is primary and international dynamic is secondary. You knew this, I think. That's why you asked this hard question. What could the international community do for Syria, Egypt, Tunisia, for Turkey, for all of them? First, I will repeat what Diogenes said to Alexander the Great. First, do no harm, right? First, do not cast a shadow upon what I am already doing. Egypt, before Mubarak fell, was the second largest recipient of American aid in the world, right? The least you could do was to unplug Egypt. Tunisia, before the people rose and overthrew, I don't remember his name anymore, and nor should anybody, was a client state of France. The Sultan of Oman, Qaboos, is still protected by the British Air Force. The first thing you could do is at least don't support the dictatorship. At least don't funnel billions of dollars or euros to support the Algerian military dictatorship, to support, Oman, to support all of these dictatorships. This will be quite enough, I think, if you are an average Democrat in Egypt or Algeria or in the Gulf states. The rest people can do by themselves, but very often the opposite has been the case. From Mossadegh in 1958 to the restoration of Aliyev with Russian support. What did the international community did when Elchi Bey was struggling to survive? What was the Orange Revolution of that time? Who intervened to save the popularly elected Azeri president in the middle of a sea of dictatorship? No. Instead, the international community stood aside, went step by step with Russia's, Soviet Russian military and political backing. Nomenclature was restored in Azerbaijan. At least don't do that. At least don't have foreign interventions and massive funding for dictatorships. That should be enough, I think, international contribution to democracy in the Middle East and North Africa.
Thank you, Şehir.
Well, I think this is a very important question. The effects of globalization on political change in the Middle East was also through the changes that occurred in the international balance of power. Basically, the diminishing power of the United States has decreased the ability of the United States to interfere and mingle into the affairs of the countries. That was a very critical, I think, contribution to at least changes in Egypt particularly. If not in Tunisia. Obama won the elections in 2008 without the majority of the whites. So that he showed that it's possible to win elections in the United States without the majority of the whites. I think that could also be related to the effects of globalization in some way. The increasing migrant community, the population in the United States, is the driving force behind his election. We should not undermine or see the role of Obama in small ways. He played a very critical role. I don't think he was the orchestrator of this change, but he understood that this is an inevitable change. So he jumped on board. He wanted to shape the discourse of this political change. So the naming of this as the Arab Spring actually is a way to basically hijack the main discourse of this political change, express it in a more positive way, so that it could be understood that way. Because in the United States, I mean, in Turkey, of course, as you know very well, there is one, monolithic understanding of the United States. There is not one United States. There are conflicting camps, and there are two basic positions on the Arab revolutionary changes. One is the view of Arab Spring. This change is basically very positive. The other is a more neoconservative opinion that basically what this is Bradley's book, that the Islamists hijacked this revolution. Actually, Islamists did not try to hijack this revolution in any way. If they wanted, they could do that very easily, at least in the case of Egypt. They wanted to shape the revolution together with other social forces, but their only guilt is win an election, afterwards. So because they were the only, prepared political party, they were poised to win the elections afterwards. But other than that, I really don't see how, for example, they tried to hijack. But that's another thing. But this is the rival discourse. So of course, Obama himself, I think the election of Obama in the United States in 2008 influenced the region very much. And, I can only speculate on this because we don't have, only some opinion polls about this. But when you conduct opinion polls about the United States image, it's always negative because of the Israeli connection of the United States. Obama is understood as the president of the United States. But the way he was elected, that somebody, who is a minority could be elected in the United States, who is a black, very much, gave a hope for political change in the region. We could do that, in our own countries. If he was able to do that, we could also do that. I think that's an indirect effect. I think more research needs to be done how that played. But he, as a character, as a person in a very critical position, that's the presence of the United States. I think it's quite, I should not make this a, morally charged, opinion or something like that. But it's quite lucky that, instead of Obama, we could have somebody as president of the United States that, as a supporter of this political change. If the United States wanted, they could easily continue, give some more blood to Mubarak, and that would escalate. That would, of course, make this conflict longer. Eventually that would also come to his overthrow, but it was, better, for the United States to support this political change and for Egyptians as well to support. And now we see in Syria, for example, the opposite camp of the world balance of power. Syria is supported by Russia and China. They insist to support their favorite dictator. That the United States did not in the case of Egypt. They stopped supporting their favorite dictator. But in the case of Syria, it certainly gives more blood to Assad, but that would only prolong his eventual fate. The other thing, of course, that would also relate to my argument about the social media in the region is the ironic fact that Obama himself was the first U.S. president who successfully used social media to his advantage. He collected record amount of campaign contributions through the social media. So that should also be noted. I think they are from the same generation, in that way, so they could find these two. But I would also like to comment, if it's possible for time, on the Islamic Islamism, the notion of Islamism. Right now, what's occurring, I think that Turkey plays a key role here that could also be related to globalization and the fact that Turkish model is being watched and understood in the Middle East as an inspiring model. Maybe it has less to do with Islam per se, but it has more to do with the success economic success of this government. So what the Arab youth, including the supporters of these Islamic movements, demand is not ideological formulas, ideological programs, but workable formulas, workable programs that could lead to economic success. They are tired with this charismatic moral authority kind of movements. They want institutionalized, efficient, more efficient leadership who uses the religious card less, but at the same time deliver success to the people. Thank you.
Okay, this must be the point where I have to close the session. Thank you for your attendance, and maybe a last applause for the speakers. We have tea and coffee in front of the conference rooms. And we have to shorten the break and limit it with 20 minutes.
açıp kapamak belki olabilir. Tanımıyor değil mi?
Şu keyboard'u tanıma şeyi diyor ama onu da yapmıyor.
Böyle taktığım gibi şey oluyor, tanıyor mu?
Allah. Şey olabilir mi? Mesela view slideshow yaptığınızda belki hani bir üst tarafa gönderiyor ya. Tanımıyor. Şuradan.
Ha, onlar zaten.
Ama hiçbiri çalışmıyor.
Neyse ya, boş verelim.
O zaman ne oldu? Nasıl olacak?
Konuşayım yani.
Tamam. All right, so we'll start the second session. We're a little bit late and we're missing a speaker. Mihail Tuman is not here today because he's doing his field search in Antakya, Hatay, and you know, he couldn't be here, and so we are going to be three, and our first speaker is Nurullah Ardıç. So we can go for 20 minutes, I think, each, and then we're going to open the Q&A session. Nurullah Ardıç graduated from Boğaziçi University, Department of Sociology in 1999. In the same department, he received his master's degree with a thesis titled Mobile Phone and Renegotiation of the Public and the Private in 2001. He also received another master's degree from University of California, Los Angeles, from the Department of Sociology, and completed his doctorate degree there at UCLA. He's currently assistant professor of sociology at Istanbul Şehir University. Among his many publications, I'm going to mention 3 books. The recent one is Islam and the Politics of Secularism, which was published in 2011.
2012, actually. January.
2012, okay.
Yeah, a little late.
So we need to update this. And Küreselleşme, Çağdaş Bir Değerlendirme with S. Özcan.
Sevinç Özcan.
Sevinç Özcan. This is 2011.
Well, it's forthcoming too.
Okay. And Medeniyet ve Klasik. Again, he is among the writers of this book. And the title of his talk is Understanding the Arab Awakening, a Macro-Sociological Perspective. Mr. Ardıç.
Thank you. This was a little short notice for me, so I tried to put something together. This is actually going to be a presentation of a small part of my upcoming article on the Arab Spring, which is about to appear. And sorry about the technical problem. We couldn't hook the computer, so I can't show you my presentation here, but I'm trying to read my paper as clearly as possible. So let me begin. The so-called Arab Spring, or the Arab Awakening, which is a more correct term actually, because the revolutionaries, the activists themselves, as you may know, don't like the term Arab Spring. But we can use it in quotation marks, I guess. This event has caught the world, Middle Eastern rulers and the analysts alike, off guard. And I think in chaotic times, such as the ones that we are going through, small groups and their seemingly unimportant activities may create unexpected effects. And in the present era of globalization, the political butterfly effect may have become a reality. So when we look at the Arab Spring, it has been interpreted by 2 broad politico-ideological perspectives, especially in the popular media. One of them is the liberal, the other one socialist. They interpret it as either the last phase of a global march toward democratization, or as yet another instance of the putative recent global revolt against capitalism. I will try to argue instead that the Arab Spring is the result of an interplay between external and internal factors, that's to say, between the changing structure of the international political military order and domestic economic and cultural influences. In my article, I try to explain this interplay
with reference to 3 different sets of factors, and 9 factors in total. The first set, which might be called the immediate factors, include the people's search for social and economic justice, their demand for social and political liberties, and their desire for dignity and respect based on their frustration with the existing oppressive regimes. The second, background factors, include 2 broad ones: the international political military context and the impact of religion. Finally, we might also talk about 4 distinguishing features of the Arab awakening, including the role of the military, the significance of cities and the urban youth as the principal actors of the uprisings or revolutions, as well as their use of ICTs, the information and communication technologies, such as the Facebook, Twitter, as we all know, but also cell phones and the satellite TV and particularly Al Jazeera, for organizational and ideological purposes, which, by the way, may have significant implications for the study of social movements and revolutions. Among these 3 sets of factors, because of time constraints, I will focus on one of them only, the background factors. And the other ones, in the previous speakers also touched upon some of them, and well, they also touched upon some of the ones that I will talk about today. So I'm going to just focus on international politics and religion. But before I proceed, let me say a few words about the method. I basically like and subscribe to a Weberian methodology that favors multi-causal explanation in understanding complex human phenomena. So I will try to avoid reducing the causes of the Arab Spring to a single, all-embracing and all-determining factors such as religion or class conflict or international politics. Anyway, so background factors. The first one, as I mentioned, is in the international political military context, and this includes 3 components. One is the end of the Cold War and post-9/11 context. The other one is foreign intervention, and the third one is what might be called the post-Spring politics. Let me begin by foreign intervention, which is the most concrete and dimension of this international politics, the influence of it, and the easiest one to detect. There are, as you know, 2 basic types of foreign intervention. One is direct, the other is indirect. The best and so far the only example of direct intervention is the case of Libya in the Arab Spring, as you know. Shortly after the armed battle between the opposition forces and Gaddafi's military and paramilitary forces turned into a civil war, the NATO countries, led by France and Britain and later by the US, decided to provide humanitarian aid and military assistance to rebels, as we all know. And they quickly started bombing the Gaddafi compounds and forces, which helped the opposition forces win the battle relatively easily, which was a battle which was an almost impossible victory over the Central Army without the help of NATO. As for indirect intervention, we can cite 3 examples of it. One is the efforts by the P5 and the GCC countries on Yemen. GCC is, as you know, the Gulf Cooperation Council. The second one is the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia on Bahrain, whose, as you will all know, again, large Shia population attracts Iran's attention. And the final example is the ongoing rivalry between Russia and Iran on the one hand, and Turkey, the EU, and the US on the other, over Syria. I'm not going into details of these because they are already very familiar cases. The second element of the international politics, the end of the Cold War and post-9/11 context, have together undermined both the legitimacy and sovereignty of the oppressive Arab regimes. Because after the Cold War was over, the 2 superpowers did not require the presence of dictatorships in the Arab world, which in turn led to a crisis of legitimacy on their behalf. Or rather, I should say that this event has revealed the absence of legitimacy of these regimes among their citizens. Secondly, after 9/11, as we all know, a war on terror campaign was launched by the US, which has fundamentally threatened the national sovereignty of many Muslim states, including, of course, the Arab regimes. These regimes previously relied on external superpower support for sovereignty, as well as on an internal security establishment, which consists of the army, the police, and the intelligence services, called muhaberat, as we know. So therefore, the Arab Spring is, in a sense, a product, perhaps an unintended product, of a fundamental change in the international order. The end of the bipolar political-military order and what's called the new imperialism, which appeared in the form of US interventionism after 9/11. But we also know that these regimes were in the first place products of the bipolar international order. They emerged as a result of a series of military coups d'etats, what they themselves called nationalist revolutions, during the 1950s and 60s, following the formal decolonization of the Middle East. These regimes, some of these regimes, were supported by the Soviet Union and the Cold War atmosphere, rather than the popular legitimacy of their own populations, and they adopted the Soviet state system and an ideology of Arab socialism. Others, notably Saudi Arabia and the pre-1979 Iran, were supported by the capitalist bloc, especially by the US. So with their support, these regimes eliminated all potentially rival political and economic power centers by destroying the previously instituted parliaments and political competition in their own countries, by nationalizing the economy, and by strangling civil society. They also used their political branches, such as the Jamahiriya in Libya, and the Arab Socialist Party in Egypt, and the Ba'ath parties in Iraq and Syria, as tools of domination and control in politics, thereby leaving no space for opposition and civil initiatives. But as we all know, these efforts were not entirely successful, because the Islamic opposition in particular has successfully used informal networks for their primarily underground political activities. So these regimes relied on external political, military, and economic support, and on patrimonial mechanisms in economy and politics, creating a small group of beneficiaries loyal to the regime, as well as on violent security measures and an espionage system. But all this has recently changed. So how to make sense of this change? There are, as I mentioned in the beginning, two conspiratorial narratives that explain the emergence of the Arab Spring, which appear especially in the popular media, but also among some academics. The first narrative holds that the capitalist system's need for new markets is the driving force behind the Arab Spring. So this view claims that the multinational corporations that are assumed to be controlling Western politicians and decision-making centers, they wish to expand geographically to sell their products to new markets. The second narrative has, in turn, two versions of itself. One is the leftist version, which argues that though these revolutions started out as pro-democratic, anti-imperialist uprisings, they may soon be stolen by Western imperialism. According to this view, non-socialist and non-progressive participants of the revolutions are prone to be easily co-opted by imperialism and to fall prey to the imperialist ambitions of Western governments. Another version of this narrative simply claims that the Arab Spring is an imperialist conspiracy. And I quote here an interesting statement by the Communist Party of India, which they declared 2 months ago. They say, quote, "Americans are directly behind the turbulence or are helping the troublemakers in order to install new puppets throughout the region," end quote. The second version of this narrative is the liberal one, which is more sympathetic toward this process. This narrative sees the Arab Spring as part of a long march toward democracy in the non-Western world and as a sign of the failure of Islamism in Muslim society. It also holds that the post-1989 colored revolutions in post-communist societies, such as the ones in Poland, Romania, former Czechoslovakia, Serbia, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, respectively, and others, such as the failed Sener revolution in Lebanon in 2005 and the fall of governments in Philippines and in Ecuador, were all part of the same singular process that had begun with Huntington's third wave of revolutions in 1974. So this view sees the Arab Spring as part of the fourth and final episode of the glorious waves of democratization. But all these views or narratives suffer from one-sidedness and a myopic view of the events. And not only that, but also they deny the participants of revolutions any agency. This way, they imply that the Arab Muslim people of the Middle East cannot be a true actor in history. They can watch the unfolding of history, but they can't make it. Also, even the anti-American or anti-imperialist versions of this narrative help perpetuate the existing US hegemony by preventing any imagination of agency and power without an American or Western agitation. So, I think neither Arab exceptionalism argument nor democratic universalism argument holds true. Of course, I don't deny that, or nobody can deny that there is a movement toward democratization in some parts of the world, and that the color revolutions in the post-socialist regions are to some extent connected with each other. Also, international powers, and particularly the US, the EU, and Russia, have probably tried to develop strategies, multiple and shifting strategies, to influence the direction of events in both Eastern Europe and the Middle East. But such reductionist views that sees the Arab Spring as a function of the capitalistic need for new markets or of a long global march toward democracy led by a metaphysical, invisible hand, which also implies the imagined end of history, or still of an outright American conspiracy, not only miss the incredible complexity of these events, but they also reproduce the age-old Orientalistic prejudices against non-Western peoples and Arabs in particular. As I mentioned, the third element of the international dimension is the post-Spring politics, but because of time constraints and because the earlier speakers already talked about it, I want to skip this part, and if we have time or during the Q&A session, we can go back to this point. So I want to jump to the next important topic of my talk, which is the ideological background of the Arab awakening, provided by the influence of Islam. There was, of course, a variety of groups with their differing demands, expectations, motivations, and ideologies involved in in the uprisings and revolutions. And these groups included a range of people from liberals and socialists to Islamists and to the ordinary religious people. But I think Islam has been the strongest and most popular of these ideological orientations. It influenced both the Islamist groups and the general political culture in a broader sense that includes a large set of values and symbols that carry political underpinnings that go beyond narrower ideological doctrines and party politics. I also think that Islam has influenced the psychological motivations of the ordinary people. This, I think, can be easily detected with a glance at the slogans and discourses of the activists. Many of them chanted "God is great," which was probably the most common slogan. They also refer to many Quranic verses and Islamic idioms. They called their victims, or victims of revolutions, martyrs. They even changed their squares and to rename them Martyr Square, as in the case of Libya. And they prayed collectively during demonstrations. Moreover, the recent roots of the current awakening go back to the early 2000s, when people across the Muslim world took to the streets in solidarity with the second Palestinian Intifada, which began, as we know, in the year 2000, and later to protest against the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. So these protests eventually culminated in more organized movements, sometimes coalitions of different groups, such as the Kifaya movement in Egypt, which is a coalition of Islamic and secular activists that was formed in Egypt in 2004 and 2005 to prevent the re-election of Hosni Mubarak. The Kifaya movement could not achieve its goal at the time,
partly because its leadership was reluctant to cooperate with Ikhwan, with the Muslim Brotherhood, which prevented it from becoming a mass movement. During the current Arab Spring too, many Islamic groups have actively participated in the protests since the very beginning. Muslim Brotherhood, which initially preferred to keep a low profile, has played a leading role in both organizing the demonstrations and providing logistical and political support for the activists. Also, in some cases, the attitude of Islamic groups has played a decisive role in the extent to which a regime is influenced by the Arab Spring. For example, in Morocco, when King Mohammed VI supported constitutional amendments enacted in June 2011, which somewhat enhanced the authority of the parliament and opened up more space for political participation, the Islamist opposition, led by the Justice and Development Party, accepted this compromise, once the king promised that Islam would still be kept as the basis of national identity and law in the new revised constitution. As I said already, when we look at their discourses, we can also see the impact of Islamic sources or culture in general, because we know that the protesters often drew on the rich repertoire of anti-oppressive material emphasizing justice, which could easily be found in the cultural toolbox provided by Islamic sources. Also, Friday prayers and Friday sermons, already an important venue for spreading Islamic messages, have become increasingly politicized during the spring. Furthermore, many mosques, particularly those controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, functioned as a locus of anti-government agitation and logistical centers of protests. For example, a journalist who does not hide his dislike of the Islamists says, quote, "What many Western observers have failed to notice is that most of the anti-government demonstrations that have been sweeping the Arab world over the past 10 months were often launched from mosques following Friday prayers. This is especially true regarding Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Jordan," end quote. Also, we know that prominent religious leaders calls on people through not only sermons, but also the internet and Al Jazeera to act against aggression and join anti-regime protests across the region have been very influential. The activists in both Tunisia and Egypt especially have expressed solidarity with Palestinian resistance against Israel from the very beginning, which also got a positive response from Palestinians. So, in fact, when we consider, when we look at the picture in general, we see that Islam's impact on this Arab awakening is not an unusual one, for several reasons. First, because Islam has historically been one of the most important social forces in the Middle East, as we all know. And Sherif Mardin has shown this in the case of Turkey. But there are also other studies in some other regions. Secondly, Islamic opposition has almost always constituted the biggest challenge to the secular oppressive regimes in the region. They were armed with a spirit of resistance derived from a highly politicized reinterpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah, but they also had the advantage of being able to work through mosques and charity organizations and informal networks. And since the 1980s, they have capitalized on the failed neoliberal policies that have created poverty and inequality in the region. And I have many statistics showing how economic inequalities, okay, I'm finishing up, were an important factor in shaping people's attitudes toward the regimes. So in conclusion, revolutionary transformations in the modern world are an unintended consequence of the interplay between internal contradictions and the dynamics of the societies in transition on the one hand, and the pressing impact of international structures and institutions upon those regimes on the other. Arab Spring, in this sense, exemplifies a near inevitable end of the authoritarian regimes that fail to meet the needs and expectations of their citizens, particularly the educated urban youth, in a context in which political openness is a norm and a certain level of economic growth has been achieved or seemed achievable in an increasingly integrated world. But this awakening is not to be understood as an imperialist conspiracy or as the last episode or wave of the global democratization process that has been going on for some decades. Rather, this event refers to a reconstruction of the Middle East within the framework of the aspirations and demands of the new generations who have grown up in cities and are educated for justice, dignity, affluence, and freedom that have brought the end of the Western-backed oppressive regimes. Finally, although it is ultimately the organizational power that matters, the Arab Spring also means, considering Mohammed Bouazizi and others who defied the overwhelming authority of regimes by setting their bodies aflame, that ordinary butterflies with fire in their wings can actually turn into larger-than-life figures by helping to tear seemingly invincible structures to shreds and topple the seemingly indestructible dictators who are attracted like moths to the glittering flames of power. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. And the Turkish example, political perspectives 1 year after the revolution. Mr. Rizzi? That's right.
Would you like to
Do you want to come? Here. So we're waiting for that.
Yep. Oh, we have a spare time, so it's the last. I'm a bit emotional. So it's the last week here in Şehir University, and because we have this kind of spare time, I would like really to thank all the staff of Center for Turkish Modern Studies, and in particular Professor Umit Şidre and Muzaffer Chanel. They helped me a lot in this month, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you. Okay, I think that I can start without that. I'm going to spend some words to clarify a couple of points. First, this is a part of my master thesis, so it's a work in theory about the Turkish example, as said before, and in the Middle East area, with the specific case of Tunisia. Because of that, in order to better understand the core concepts of my presentation, I consider useful a brief overview on the country. Tunisia is the first daughter of the Arab awakening, and it is well aware from the very beginning of the burden on its shoulder towards the people who, like Tunisians, aspire to freedom and prosperity. On the other hand, the international community looks with interest at the developments in the democratization process taking place in Tunisia, especially after the victory in the Constituent Assembly elections of October 23rd of the Islamic Party and Nahda, led by Rashid Ghannouchi. Therefore, we have to spend few lines in order to better understand this key player, what is its history, evolution, and political ideology. The origin of this party are placed in the context of the development of Islamic political movements trend of the late 70s. In 1981, the lawyer Abdel Fattah Morouro and the professor of philosophy Rashid Ghannouchi created the Harakat al-Iqtijad al-Islami, that in English is Islamic Tendency Movement. Immediately after the request for legal recognition, about 6 members, including the leader himself, Ghannouchi, were arrested. The harsh criticism of the policies of Ben Ali and the growing cult of his personality exposed the movement to a severe repression. Because of that, Ghannouchi chose the road of exile in London. Indeed, from this moment onward, the movement within the country is deconstructed. Other standing point in the party is the London Congress in '98 that marked the start of the so-called democratic change. Thus began a process of normalization that will lead the party to take more moderate position and to take away from terrorism and violence that distinguished it in the previous years. Finally, in 2005, a Nahda address to October 18 movement with the aim of creating a common front against the regime. And Nahda is presented not only as an element of opposition, but as a force determined to become actively involved in the political life in the country, following this time democratic rules of arena. Immediately after the revolution on January 14, Rashid Ghannouchi has returned back in Tunis to lead the movement for the elections. The campaign for Constituent Assembly has seen a Nahda compete proposing a program with a strong social vocation, especially very attentive to the lower class, but openly in favor of free market economic and affirmation of Arab Islamic identity in Tunisia. In short time, Nahda was able to restore an extensive network of charitable associations as the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that have developed a series of relief measures for those facing difficulties. On the victory in Nahda, therefore, has focused the interest of experts from all over the world who wonder how the new government will proceed to attain the full democratization of the country. In this situation, the Premier Erdogan on September 14 in Tunis has been made a frequent reference to Turkey, especially after the visit of the Premier Erdogan on September 14 in Tunis. In particular, the Turkish conservative democratic model, on the example of European Christian democratic parties, which offer a neutral and not anti-religious example, different from the previous one adopted, the French active secular model, was appreciated not only among the ranks of the moderate Islamic Tunisian party, but in general also the majority of the population. Concluding this introduction, I'm going to start my analysis underlying the definition that many use to assess this mutual interest between Turkey and, in general, Middle Eastern countries. Scholars talk about model. But model is a concept that I find unsuitable in this case because of indicating a compact corpus of norms and institutions that would not be easily enforceable in its totus in a context different from the original one. Therefore, in the process of creating a new system, we need to use, in my advice, more flexible terms such as example or experience, more capable of giving the idea of the duality of the parties involved. Say that, it's also crucial to understand that people who belong to different social groups have different perception on the Turkish experience. It's essential to analyze the perception of Tunisian people about Turkey. In fact, in a mature democracy, the public opinion should shape the political attitudes of the ruling elite. Unfortunately, in the newborn Tunisia does not have a civil society organized enough to be able to make this process totally applicable. We have so to be prepared to notice gaps between real politics and public expectation. Therefore, thanks to the TESAF survey, we have the chance to observe the public opinion on Turkey and in post-revolutionary Tunisia. In general, Turkey is the country with the highest percentage of positive views in the region, and it's also perceived as the country with the greatest effect on peace, preceding respectively UN and AU. Is it among the states and institutions considered to have more positive impact on Arab Spring? But focusing on this data on Tunisia, we noticed that the percentage of favorable responses regarding Turkey is 91%, Libya preceded with 93%. Positive opinion about Turkish role in the events of the last 12 months is around 75%. And we also observed that 86% of voters are positive regarding the fact that Turkey can be seen as an exponent on the coexistence of Islam and democracy. In this regard, it's really important, 78% of the respondents agree in supporting Turkey as a model, particularly thanks to its level of democratization, its flourishing economy, and its Muslim background. Finally, it's really interesting to underline that the sample taken in account sees Turkey as the most powerful economy in the region, and they make common use of Turkish product, from electrical appliance to books, till soap operas and TV series. Therefore, the political mechanism, especially in new democracies, as I said before, are devoted to pragmatism that is not always fully democratic, and to an up and down imposition of the agenda. We are now aware of the Tunisian population perspective, but in order to achieve more accurate analysis, we must observe the processes within the party and the dynamics dominating the relationships between interest groups, civil society, and government. Indeed, to complete the framework, we consider that Tunisia has many inequalities, based on imbalance between city and peripheries, and on the gap in the homogeneity of the level of education. These historical constants have made possible that at the dawn of the election, Tunisia faced with the polarization of society on many issues, but especially on the secular one. Clearly, different points of view correspond to different perspectives on Turkish example. The first perspective, as it's explained in the slide, refers to a more active secular state model and to a process of democratization based on partnership with the West. So it takes inspiration from the so-called Turkish secular example. Second one focuses on the reconciliation between Islam and democracy, and at ever-growing and profitable relations with other Arab countries. Therefore follows the AKP experience. A great common point is the positive experience in the economy, a successful marriage between economic liberalism and social state on the side of Northern European democracies. It could be compared to the English third way of Blair's party. This comes from the so-called Calvinist concept of Islam that inspired the Anatolian bourgeoisie, real engine of the AKP's rise. In response to the victory of Ennahda at the polls of last October, we see that the second point of view will shape the future Tunisian policies. By the way, the statements made in the previous month by the leaders of Ennahda seems favorable to the experience of the AKP government, despite the great economic support provided by Arabia Saudi and Qatar during the electoral campaign, that they did it in order to expanding soft power in North African region. That concept of moderate conservative government is well expressed by the word of the official of culture of Ennahda, Ajmi Lourimi. I will quote his words, apply Sharia is not part of our program. Sharia law for us is a set of values that we want to respect: equality, dignity, justice. Religion serves to spread them. Our vision of Islam is social. Our goal is include Islam in a society where there is respect for human rights, citizenship, women, and democratic society. Other group with Islamic roots promotes more close society. That project does not interest us. Say that, and given the recent events, the 25th of March, last Sunday, if I will have more time, I will go in depth on that. However, given the recent events, there is a sharp contrast between what is said by Ennahda, which can be well represented through a concept borrowed from Erdogan: a Muslim can govern a secular state in a successful way, and what appear to be the future perspective. Among the many notes that encourage many experts to prospect a conservative Islamic democracy in Tunisia, however, there are structural differences making it hard to implement. First of all, Ennahda does not have a strong middle class that support the party, as it happens in the ranks of the AKP. This is not a matter of secondary importance, especially considering that the localist and the populist political choice that both are pursuing is very expensive and underlies on not only the ideological but also the material perpetuation of the movement per se. Secondly, in my opinion, the balancing forces able to stop a possible Islamist drift in Tunisia are not comparable with the Turkish ones. Thirdly, we should consider that, unlike the AKP, Ennahda is a part of a coalition government with Etakatul and CRP. That forced it to separate most important position in the state and to a continuous process of bargaining of many issues. But I am aware that there are many scholars that argue that AKP is still a coalition government because of the different ideological thoughts in itself. But I have to underline that the context in Tunisia is completely different, because Etakatul and CRP are coming from a different political background. Especially they have secularist background and leftist background. Before concluding, I would report the words of one of the political advisors of Ennahda, the Italian Giacomo Fraschi, who responded to my question about how does the party look at the example of AKP at the first anniversary of a free Tunisia. But before, let me introduce some really interesting observation. First of all, Giacomo Fraschi is Italian, it's foreigner, it's not Tunisian. And he has got a really strong Christian background. Second, his words perfectly represent how realpolitik and political dialectic differ from the theoretical analysis. I will quote his words. First, we must point out that the AKP has been inspired by Ennahda, indeed the Islamic tendency movement. It's a common mistake to think that it's rather the opposite. The harsh repression that Ennahda has suffered under Ben Ali has overshadowed it to force it to clandestinity. The AKP does not have instead suffered such a repression, which enabled the party to beat a popular consensus in the sunlight. But I'm convinced that Turkey is a model more in economic sense than in a political sense. What happened in Turkey is the result of the action of an economic class, bearer of precise values, which has been able to lead the country through a growth at impressive rates. AKP and Ennahda parties are popular, of course, but AKP can rely on this entrepreneurial class that has done so much for the country. First humiliated by the continued refusal of EU and now stirring in a remarkable economic growth with considerable diplomatic successes that he defined neo-Ottomanism. Those words, in my opinion, are really interesting because of many things, but especially because stress that even considering the strong Turkish influence in Tunisia, talking about example in the political realm, and I underline in the political realm, is still too much. As a matter of fact, it would be better to use a new paradigm that should be even more flexible. In my advice, a suitable term could be inspiration. In conclusion, I would like to stress that regardless of the routes that will run in the next years the Iran-Tunisian democracy, Turkey has made, like every good player, its first move. The Turkish government was indeed able to perceive the new state of disaffection towards the West, seen by Tunisians as a collaborationist entity during the authoritarian period. So it was then just clever enough to place itself in this vacuum as equal and future economic partner. This brief reflection makes us to understand how Turkey expands its soft power across the region with various strategies, one of which I consider to be set itself as inspiring model as other way toward modernization that for too many years in these countries was conceived only as westernization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzi. Okay, so our third speaker is Mr. Cengiz Candar, and probably he doesn't need introduction, but I'll do so anyways. He's a journalist, graduated from Ankara University from Political Sciences department in 1970. After living in Damascus and Beirut as a member of the Palestinian resistance movement, and in Geneva, Paris, Amsterdam, he came back to Turkey in 1974. He started his professional life as a journalist at Vatan newspaper and continued with Turkish news agency, Cumhuriyet, Hürriyet, Güneş, and he's currently writing for Sabah, but I read him in Radikal. And, you know, among the books he published is Direnen Filistin in 1976, Dünden Yarına İran, 1981, Orta Doğu Çıkmazı, 1983, Tarihle Randevu, 1983, Güneşin Yedi Rengi, 1987, Benim Şehirlerim in 2000. And the title of his talk today is Arab Spring and Turkey.
Thank you, our charming chairman. This charming is a code word between two of us that we were in Mardin last weekend, so she knows why I called her so, as though she's charming, apart from being the code word between us. Well, it seems my CV is quite an obsolete one. I need to update it, and it is. It seems it's never mentioned that I spent over a decade in academic life instructing or teaching in various universities. So I have nothing against to be presented as a humble correspondent, journalist, but still, as I've said, I need to update my CV. And for your information, I will not provide you with anything concerning interactive communications technology, no screens, no computers, and also I don't have a prepared text to speak over. Therefore, don't take this as a presentation, but as a talk. And I will try to offer a loose theoretical framework of the title under which I'm entitled to talk, which is Turkey and the Arab Spring. First, which became a tradition of mine, that I have to start to tell you my allergy to this term Arab Spring. I don't like it at all. And I find it very misleading to call what's happening as the Arab Spring. I rather prefer the Arab Revolution, not because that as some people assume that I am a revolutionary and I like revolutions, or to pronounce this word revolution, because of a very simple reason, simple two reasons actually. One is that those who are involved of this undertaking call it revolution. They themselves call it as revolution, whether you go to Tunisia, Egypt, elsewhere in Arab world, Lebanon, Jordan, the Palestinians themselves, and nowadays the Syrians. If you happen to talk any Syrian, of course not on the side of the regime, but the others, they would call it as revolution, the Arab word for revolution. This is one reason. The second reason is because of the magnitude of, the historical magnitude of what is happening, and with the bearings that it might bring to the future of the globe, it deserves to be called as a revolution. It's a great undertaking, a profound one, a historically epoch-making, which is very, very transformative, not only for the societies that this undertaking is taking place, but because of the geopolitics over which it is moving, that definitely it will have global implications and consequences. And for this colossal, historical, epoch-making undertaking, we are yet at the very, very, very preliminary stages of it. It seems that it will be a long journey with a very unclear destination. To what does it lead to, where it will stop, how it will stop, and how the undertaking will keep on moving. As we see, what we had witnessed in Tunisia and Egypt is very, very different than what we have seen in Libya or Yemen, and what now we are witnessing in Syria is much different than what we have been seeing elsewhere, from Tunisia to Libya to Egypt or Bahrain or whatever in this vast geopolitical space that's called Mena, Middle East and North Africa. So what the lowest common denominator, or the common denominator, is, it is very transformative. It's history making, history writing. So only we will be more clear about what has been passed through after certain decades, maybe. When we look behind, in terms of historiography, we will be much more defining and descriptive about what has happened in the meantime. But again, as though we do not know yet the outcome of it, as much we are aware of its magnitude. I myself, as far as I am concerned, I detect a historical undertaking which most probably is the undoing of the international order that was formed in the post-World War I period, which in the Arab world, in the Arab societies, in the Arab intellectual circles, in a certain generalized way, defined as the Sykes-Picot system, referring back to the first international imperial agreements of partitioning the Middle East. So if we will be talking about the post-Ottoman history of the Middle East, still it is as it was designed to be, on the partitioning of the geography extending from certain parts of North Africa to the Levant, and Mesopotamia altogether, what we call Near East or Middle East by British terms. It's more or less, irrespective of who is ruling over what country, is the international order that was brought following the World War I. So this undertaking that we have been witnessing since a year or so, and we don't know the longitude of it, will most probably be the undoing of that historical epoch and will present us a very, very new historical landscape that it would bring. One thing which could define what is quote-unquote Arab Spring connotates for us, or what I say the revolution or the Arab Revolution, is twofold components. One is that it terminated the legitimacy of every existing structure over which that they have been built upon. No states exist anymore in this region. The names are states, but in the modern sense of the term, a state, they don't exist anymore. The most striking example is Syria. There is no state left in Syria. Why? Because it lost its purpose and its purpose and direction. You can't call the survival of the attempts to survive of a certain clan or a certain family or a certain ruling clique that the state is existing. It's gone. What's the purpose of today's Syria? Irrespective of all what we hear, clashes here and there, peace initiatives like Annan Plan, the others, right 2 days after tomorrow actually, on Sunday we will have here in Istanbul the meeting of Friends of Syria. Over 60, 70 nations will join to address the convictions or the tendencies of a great portion of the international community on the Syrian file. Or Kofi Annan is commuting all over and present his case to UN Security Council next week to salvage Syria. What Syria? The regime? What is that regime? Why does it exist? What is the purpose of this regime? What is its direction? It's lost. It's gone. As Mubarak system has gone, or the name you refuse to remember, Zeynel Abidin bin Ali's regime in Tunisia has gone, Gaddafi has gone, and Saddam has gone since nearly a decade. But what is being constructed? It's in construction yet, and it's very messy. That's why I say that it's a very profound undertaking with great magnitudes. This loss of purpose and direction is one of the apparent outcomes of the Arab Revolution. The other thing is the emergence of the Arab individual. which brings us one of the issues of our earlier session that Hasan Kosebalaban had addressed, globalism and its impacts. Globalism brings with itself the development of the individual. So here in this Arab Revolution that we are speaking on, the individual, which was humiliated, suppressed, non-existent for decades, came up, the Arab individual. We are having revolutions under the umbrella of the Arab Revolution with no heroes in terms of famous leaders leading, but unknown heroes, masses of people like we have nowadays in Syria, some total of individuals. Just let us try to remember in Egypt, what was the big name whose name was disseminated by international media as if he was the symbol of the demonstrations taking place in Tahrir Square in Cairo, which took place for 17 days and eventually brought down the less pharaonic power in Egypt, Mubarak's regime. His name was Wael Ghunaim. What was he? He was the Google operative in Cairo. Do you remember his name anymore? Is he running for office? Is he one of the contenders for presidency in Egypt? No. He's back to his job, most probably. And now we have this Syrian opposition in its embryonic stage. Here they are trying to unify. That they try to start from a scratch here in Istanbul, the Syrian National Council, whose chairman is Burhan Galyon. I know him personally. He will not be around after a few years, most probably. The others, you know any names? The leaders of the Syrian opposition, the resistance? No, you don't need. We don't need. Because it is the undertaking of the society in toto, which is made up by individuals. And I've just seen 10 days ago, I had a dinner with a headscarf lady who has been the Nobel Peace Laureate, the last one, Tawakkol Karman, a young Yemeni woman who is age 32. The leader of the Yemen revolution? No. But the most resistant person and who has become the symbol for Yemen, which brought her the Nobel Prize. But he's not running for presidency. She was very instrumental in removing, which she doesn't believe that he is removed, by the way, the president of Yemen for over 30 years, Abdullah Saleh, because he's still around. His system is still there, and she speaks of an unfinished revolution in Yemen. But even if he is gone, Ali Abdullah Saleh and his cohorts, she wouldn't be running for the presidency. She doesn't have such an intention at all. She doesn't think. She wants a civic society that the governance to be built upon in Yemen. And many Yemenis, perhaps, are struggling for the same purpose. So, one thing is for certain, as the combination of the emergence of the Arab individual and societies in motion that delegitimized the sub-systems, sub-regional systems, the regimes in the Arab world, and render them as entities with no purpose and direction. These culminate in one simple and single word: change. It's changing. We are across a profound historical change before our eyes. So let us come to the second word of the title, Turkey. This big change, if not a profound transformation that I think that it is in the vast geopolitical stage, it coincided with the change in Turkey. That change came in the beginning of the last decade, in the beginning of the new millennium. I don't want to give a great credit to the election of AK Party, the Justice and Development Party, in the year 2002. I give credit to it not because who they are, but because what they represent in terms of a reflection of the societal change in Turkey. Because in the elections of 2002, what we have witnessed, I sometimes mockingly term it as a political genocide. By election, Tansu Çiller, Mesut Yılmaz, whoever, all those big names, annihilated by the voters and their parties, which have long backgrounds, although interrupted by military intervention. Still, they're gone. Not because that only they were not successful and the AK people were very clever and competent, but because it was the reflection of the transformation of the Turkish society which would determine the level of that transformation when it would have found the opportunity, and that opportunity came by the elections of the year 2002. So AK Party power is a result of a change, a societal deep change in Turkish society, and it responded to that. But that period of the political power, the governance of the AK Party coincided in the regional sense very roughly, because I don't like to categorize things. I know in academic life it makes life easier. Like 9 lessons it was, 10 lessons, 7, you can make them 7, 18, 15, 2, 3, whatever. So it makes life easier, so just to make life easier, let me categorize in very roughly 3 matters that the political power of the AK Party coincided with. One is, in the regional sense, one is its economic growth to such an extent, I mean Turkey's economic growth, to such an extent that it was ready to absorb anything the region, the Middle East, could offer to him. So it had to expand to the Middle East. And it had to absorb, first, of course, hydrocarbons, natural gas and oil from the Middle East. It was ready, or whatever it would be offered. The second thing, the EU process that Turkey had been into, and gradually to change its legislation, seemingly to democratize itself. I wouldn't think that the Turkey of 1990s would be a matter for debate for Arab revolutionaries, whether it's a model or an inspiration or an example. It couldn't be. Like Süleyman Demirel around, Ecevit in some place, or Tansu Çiller, Mesut Yılmaz, these kind of people of which Turkey by ruled. How would that inspire Annahda or Egyptians or anybody in the region when it comes to revolutionize the region? So in that sense, Turkey, being in the EU process, looking like more or less democratic to attract and inspire by its governance and legislation, those who were far away from that situation. It was instrumental, Turkey's EU process, in the sense of democratization of Turkey. The third, decline of American power with its Iraq debacle. There was a vacuum in the region to be filled, either to be filled by an aspiring Iran, who was already there, and the counterbalancing power center, thanks to its economic growth and a democratic posture, was Turkey. So these all coincided with what will be happening, and now what is happening in the Arab world. So then we come to this famous zero problems policy. This is formulated, that was the catchword actually. To start to Turkey's new opening to the region. Nowadays it has been very sarcastic and ironic and criticized, of course, that what has happened to the zero problems policy. Well, yes, Turkey is a very problematic periphery right now. And it has problems with everybody. With Iran, Russia, Armenia, Iraq, to a certain extent, at least with Baghdad, if not with the Kurds, with Syria, apparently, and no problems with Greece. Only problematic country for decades for Turkey was Greece, and it has, ironically, is the zero problems neighbor of Turkey nowadays, and those designed to have no problems with are all loaded with problems. But nothing to worry about it. The zero problems was, as I've said, was a catchword to move into the region. That region, or this region, is already now, with the Arab Revolution, has become very problematic. New dynamics are unleashed, which put Turkey at a crossroads. How many minutes do I have? 5?
I'm not keeping your time.
Okay, I have to. So let me finish
I'm
it.
trying to be charming.
Okay, so let me finish it in a few words. So Turkey moved into the region in its new posture as while the region status quo corresponded to Turkey's movements. But when the region erupted, when the region was in turmoil, as it has become so over a year, you had to do either one. Either you would be on the side of the status quo to preserve the existing structure, or you would be on the side of change. So Turkey opted, the official Turkey I'm talking about, opted the second, the change. It presented itself as if it is the sponsor of change in the area. It was very quick to take position on the developments in Syria, Tunisia. It was with the ousting of the regime. Then in Egypt, only in the first week of the turbulences, the demonstrations in Tahrir, the Prime Minister of Turkey was very vocal against his Egyptian counterpart, Mubarak, that he declared that he has to go. In Libya, it lingered a bit, then it moved. In Syria, which it the leaderships have emotional family relationships even. Taking that into consideration, in Syria it was fairly quick and presented itself as a leading force to bring the downfall of the regime in Syria. So, as in the political science lexicon, you may all know that the policies are determined either that might be a choice of a policy of choice, or that might be a policy of necessity. Which one was Turkey's? That the trajectory of the Turkish foreign policy vis-à-vis the region after the Arab Revolution has taken, was that a policy of choice or policy of necessity? I think both, that they are intermingled. So, policy of necessity, because Turkey had presented itself earlier to be closer with the region. So the new dynamics that unleashed necessitated Turkey to keep in track with it, and it was a of course, that they speak of ethical choices and so on, being with the people against the regime, which I don't buy at all, such rhetoric. It is apolitical dialogue. There is no politics of morality. I don't believe in it. Morality and politics cannot get together. If you speak of, because we are on the side of this and against that, because of ethical reasons, there has to be more rational reasons than that, not because of morality. So, in any case, but it was a policy of choice in the sense that Turkey made a strategic choice to invest in the future of the region, because they strongly believe that the change in the sense of the downfall of the current existing regimes are inevitable, if not imminent, inevitable. So to have this policy of choice has something to do with being on the side of change and investing for the future in the region. Yet, and I will be concluding, it is not far from certain. It is far from certain, excuse me, it is far from certain that this policy may succeed if Turkey stays as it is. Because if we go back to the first phase of my talk, I said that what we are witnessing in the region in terms of the revolution, the Arab Revolution, a very profound, transformative, history-making change. This is interactive. If the region is changing and will be changing and transforming, you cannot stay as you are. This is an interactive relationship. So in that sense, model Turkey, example Turkey, connotes something, as far as I think, wrong, as if Turkey is the perfect example to be emulated. Turkey is far from perfection. So in order to keep its sponsoring role over the change and transformation in the region, it has to be true to transformation and change. It has to be much more democratic. It has to overcome its own Kurdish question, which gives the sites of Syrian towns in revolt. If you look at from the European perspective, just a bystander by remote control moving from one channel to the other before the TV set. You see Syria, if you can ever see, but thanks to globalization, through Facebooks or Twitters or YouTube, you can see some sites, and very similar sites you see in Turkish towns, very similar sites. And if you look at the map, the distances, 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, so you can stay as that. In order to be in the same wavelength with the inevitable change and transformation of the region, Turkey is go further. So I stop here, thank you.
I would like to comment on the, with a question, of course, on the meaning of revolution in Arabic. It's Saura. It's more like revolt than revolution. So it is. We see the downfall of the regimes. It's more like destruction of all the authoritarian regimes, but we don't know what's coming. So and maybe this is a more like question to Mr. Candar. Can we have a revolution with reformists like Ikhwan and the Salafis or other people who dominate the process right now in Egypt, in other places? They say they are reformists, not revolutionaries. Thank you.
Well, you know, revolt in Arabic, uprising. In Turkish, we don't have much nuanced meanings for different words. We call all of them as terrorism, so it's we are on the safe side most of the time. But you know, this is the maybe the richness of the English language. We have revolt, rebellion, uprising, revolution. These are different things, and in Arabic, as far as I know, revolt is more or less intifada, uprising, revolt, intifada. But revolution, as you have said, thawra. Yeah, but in any case, I go back to what I said earlier. I only reflect what they say. Those people say that when you speak with an Egyptian, Tunisian, Syrian, others, they speak about thawra. They generalize it as the revolution. Apart from the predictions to the future that we might make of the transformative dynamics, the magnitudes of the event, which deserves to be called as revolution, which brings us to the other part of your question, whether with Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwan, with Salafis, which won 21% of the votes, Salafis 37%, Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, 21%, Salafis, which makes up nearly 60% of the Egyptian electorate is very religious and pious, which it is. Let us see the realities. I mean, we were, all of us, whoever us are, we were deluding ourselves. If the 60% of the Egyptian electorate, the people, in a sense, 37 of them would vote for Muslim Brotherhood, which was illegal, and Salafis now 21%, it reflects the depth of the religiosity and the piety of the Egyptian people. So how can you rule that people with not addressing any sense of their religious and pious feelings, as you've done before, and then as much you do it, then you become the second recipient of the American aid. But you can't be a democratic rule, and then one day, when the new international dynamics are in motion, you are gone as they are gone now. But can we call this a revolution? Well, the revolution in the sense that it is not confined to one single country in the region, and it interacts and it transforms the entire political landscape. Maybe tomorrow, tomorrow in 2, 5, 10 years' time, the borders will change. Who can say that no, the borders are eternal in the Middle East? They weren't eternal, and they weren't drawn by the people of the region. What suggests the legitimacy of the border between Iraq and Syria, or between Syria and Lebanon, between Syria and Jordan, between Jordan and Palestine, between Egypt and Libya? So tomorrow, in the broader sense of the term tomorrow, we might witness erosion or erasing of certain frontiers in the Middle East. So definitely what we are at hand, or in hand, is a drastic, radical transformation. So even if Ikhwan and Salafis call themselves as reformers, not Tubar, not revolutionaries, they are the outcome of the Arab Revolution. And what they will be undertaking will add to the Arab Revolution. Maybe in a decade or 2 decades, they will be swept away. We don't know it yet. By the way, just since you have opened the issue, let me say a few more things and stop. In responding, in Egypt, some of us in this room, we were in Egypt about more than a month ago in Cairo. What we are told, to our pleasant surprise, that Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, was never as they were perceived in the outside world as the Islamic fundamentalists and so on and so forth. So they said, and many Egyptians said it, Ikhwan, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, was always the Egyptian conservatism, not more than that. And for Salafis, when we spoke to them, and their leader was married to a Turkish lady from Konya, by the way, so he feels himself very affiliated to Turkey. And I told him that you look like our Çarşamba Jamaat in Istanbul. He said, no, they have no sense of politics. They don't understand from politics. So they overlook to their Turkish brethren even that they are very political, and they speak different things about women than what we perceive about them concerning their outlook to women. Anyway, what I want to say is that politically they may, and they are, as you have said, define themselves as reformists. But when you go and ask them what happened in Egypt, they say revolution. So they are not very contradictory terms anymore, I think.
All right. Thank you I appreciate you mentioning this disconnect between Turkey being presented as a model, inspiration, whatever, and her own U-turn in democratization or democracy or whatever. It had to be mentioned, and you did it. Now, there is very little. I know. Good. I appreciate that too. Cengiz, there's very little mention of the issue of Israel. I mean, we all know that Palestine is the dominating theme in the Arab discourse. I find it surprising that in this profound revolutionary fervor that's, you know, all around the region, there's not really any reference to to Israel as such, you know, as an issue, as a problem. Do you think this revolution, as you mentioned it, creates a window of opportunity for the reformists in the Arab world to start communicating, to start adopting a new language regarding Israel? That's the first part of my question. Let's look at the flip side of the coin. Let's look at it from Israel's side. I think this is the first time in Israeli history that Israel looks upon an Arab world which is transforming, awakening, changing, revolutionizing itself, and perhaps presenting itself as a model for Israeli liberals. The liberal opinion in Israel, do you think they would sort of, what do you think is the feeling inside Israel? Are there any possibilities for a new dialogue between the two sides? Any sympathy, any empathy, any new channels?
Well, it's quite a complicated issue, and I think why don't you organize a 2-day symposium just to address this very issue that you raised, because it deserves it, and there is no very clear and ready answer for that. But I could say at least that if I go back to what I had said some moments ago about the losing the purpose and direction for a state, that the existing states, so-called states in the region, lost or are losing their purpose and direction, and therefore their legitimacy. They are getting delegitimized. So what is, after all, a dialogue with Israel? To bring up a Palestinian state. For what? For what? What kind of a state? Where? So the notion of Palestinian, independent Palestinian state, with the new dynamics that is unleashed through this revolution, becomes very controversial and problematic in the deep subconscious of people, at least. Because all the peace proposals, the efforts, mediation between Israelis and Palestinians are based upon the Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories, which they call the territories, not occupied territories, and whether the territory is occupied, whatever, that the Palestinians would have an independent state of their own. Israel is already withdrew from Gaza, and Gaza is run by Hamas. Although under occupation, West Bank, there is a Palestinian administration under PLO. They can't unite, and Gaza is very badly governed. I mean, it is not governed. It's a wastebasket sort of thing. And the demography ticks. In 30-year time, 20-year time, 40-year time, the Arab population between the sea, the Mediterranean, and the river, as they call it, Bain in Arabic, it's very, it has a rhyme, Bain Bahar o Nahar, from the sea to the river, which is the Jordan River, Israel, so-called Israel plus the occupied territories of Mandate Palestine of 1947, the British period, the Arab population will outnumber the Jewish population. So either Israel will have an apartheid state or permanent occupation, which is untenable. It can't survive. Or an apartheid state in the form of South Africa of 1970s, 60s, or if it will be a democratic one state, the Palestinian Arabs will run the state. Then what will become of the Zionist project, which was basically the nation state of the Jews? It has to go. And why the Arabs are in a hurry to have a state in the 22% of the mandate Palestinian territory under too many benchmarks, safeguards, limitations, penalties, so on and so forth, under the mercy of Israel? Why? They are living this life since 1948. So if they will be patient enough and they are multiplying, they will outnumber the Jews after 20, 30 years. So this notion of state is not Palestinian state, I mean, because the existing states are collapsing and being in shambles around Palestine is no more a very urgent or inspiring thing. Because after all, when we speak of an independent Palestinian state, what we had in mind, or the international community, let us say, let the Palestinians have a state like Jordanians, or Lebanese, or Syrians. But those states are losing their legitimacy. So how can we offer, how we can offer to Palestinians an entity which is being removed from the map? It was interesting if Israelis would be flexible, and despite being Jews, intelligent enough, 2 decades ago, then it was plausible. But today's Israel is looking much more like the old Arab societies of the last decade or so. They are looking more like Arab societies than being a Jewish society. The Israeli state is also it's collapsing in terms of purpose and direction. If it was not the American or international security umbrella and consideration for the survival of the Israel with this mentality, with this kind of governance, and with this sort of suicidal trend, cannot survive more than a few years. So when it comes to Israeli liberals, what they think like what we think and discuss. So it's a difficult situation, but as I said, now you are very right that which was the centerpiece of the Middle East politics forever, the Palestine-Israel conflict, is sidelined now. And it's in the deep freeze, waiting to be deblocked, depending on how the developments would unleash around Palestine-Israel theater. It deserves, as a today's symposium, dedicated only for this matter.
Thank you. I have a very quick comment and then a question. I guess I heard it on Al Jazeera International a couple of days back. A Libyan guy was talking about an experience, a talk with his Algerian friend, and his Algerian friend said Libyan people are dead people fearing death. It was before, of course, Libyan uprising or revolution, whatever you call it. And he was saying, thank God we showed all the world, and to him as well, that Libyans are not dead people and they're not fearing death. So I want to thank all the speakers today, and particularly Cengiz, Candar and Nurullah as well, for kind of underscoring the importance of the agency of the Arab individual. And as you have stated, that state that does not exist, in your opinion, had to come down or had to be deconstructed for that Arab individual to emerge. They're not passive recipients of change, but they're active participating in that. They are agents of change. And I hope those Arab individuals, some total of Arab individuals, will do away with the name of the region as well, which I detest, Near East or Middle East, and they come up with a name for the region. And a quick question about Syria. As you have stated, this zero-problem policy with the Middle East was a way to open up to the region. And based on that policy, Turkey lifted the visa requirement and adopted an open-door policy to Syrians, even just after the at the press conference after the signing of this agreement between Syria and Turkey. Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu was saying Turkey is our Syrian brother's second country. So we welcome them, and we our foreign ministry and also Turkish officials prefer to call Syrian refugees as guests, which has no connotation in international refugee law and is devoid of any legal guarantee. So I don't like to accept that. I would prefer to call them refugees. There are around 16 to 18, I think, thousand Syrian refugees in Turkey and in Lebanon and also in Jordan. And UNHCR expects to, by the end of the summer, to have around 100,000 Syrian refugees scattered all around the world. Maybe it's high, maybe less. But Turkey is already feeling the, let's say, effects or repercussions of the Arab Spring or revolution, as you prefer to call it. And what I'm concerned about is Turkey opted for change, as you said it. And for some, Turkey actually is way too engaged and it's taking way too much part. And it's not only the Syrian refugees that it will find at its doors, maybe it will be pulled into something that it wouldn't be able to control, lose control. So what do you expect? I mean, not particularly related with the refugee question, but in general, Turkey will be pulled into this, as you kind of defined as mess, or we are unable to tell what it will lead to. We don't know what it will happen, if it is going to be good or bad. And Turkey's active engagement, is it a negative thing, or what do you expect to happen? Thank you.
For the Libyan thing, I think the ball should be on his court. Italy is geographically close, but to your question, let me be very brief, really. Turkey is already in. Whether it is negative or positive, it is inevitable. So, irrespective of being negative or positive, or putting value judgments, we have to see the things as Turkey having a border of 911 kilometers long with Syria, and having this influx of humans in its territory, with a certain vision of history, and also sharing Kurds on both sides of the borders, cannot remain aloof to the developments in Syria. So, it couldn't escape, it wouldn't escape from what had befallen upon its shoulders, Turkey. How it will carry this on, that remains as a question. We will see. If the question has a unpronounced part in terms of whether Turkey may engage militarily, not unilaterally, as far as I know, I hear, and I follow, not unilaterally. If such a situation occurs, that the military action will be followed in order to remove the regime in Syria, or because of the humanitarian disasters or catastrophes that might be taking place, if there would be a military action, Turkey would look for a multilateral effort under certain international legitimacy. Otherwise, in terms of a unilateral action, as far as today is concerned, what they say, what they think, what on what scenarios they focus upon, it doesn't seem very likely. But in this region, unlikely things always happen. So we can't rule it as much. It is also in the calculus of probabilities. We have to take that into consideration as well.
Thank you very much. My question is about skepticism about borders losing its significance. I wish, I hope, I pray that the Sykes-Picot order is going to collapse, as you have suggested, that these borders lose their significance. What is Kuwait but a gas station, we could say, right? We could say all of these things. But then there's the post-communist pessimism. What is Belarus or Kyrgyzstan but Stalin's fantasy? 20 years have passed, and none of the they have no historical precedents. And the same way they were created, they have continued indoctrinating their people and preserve those borders. So we do say these things, but when I encounter an Arab friend, you know, even the most liberal one, or socialist one, or Islamist one, in the background, they are so much loaded with Lebanese nationalism, Syrian nationalism, because these states have been in existence for decades. And probably easily I could say the same for Turkey. Even I think the most liberal, socialist, Islamist, what have you, Turkish individual in the background has a big baggage of Turkish nationalism, Italian nationalism, what nationalism you have. And this is, I think, quite a global phenomenon. We haven't seen many change in post-1945 borders. I mean, these states, yes, they were based on a fiction, but they have existed for generations. I wonder if you could speak more, because you know the Arab, I mean, you have lived there, you've traveled, you know much more about the impact of Arab nationalism in Syria, Iraq, Palestine, and elsewhere. Do you really think that there is a trans-border solidarity and identity that could justify changing of borders and kind of abandoning the idea of Lebanon, abandoning the idea of Jordan, abandoning the idea of Syria in the Middle East?
Well, I'm aware that we are already run out of time, right? And also this question corresponds an issue that I love to talk on, and again, the substance of it deserves. This is again for Ümit Cizre for another symposium, huh? So, but it's interesting that you remind us of the character of the regimes in Belarus and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, but the borders in Europe changed 3 times. After the World War I, changed. No more Habsburg Empire around. Germany was different. Ottomans were gone. After the Second World War, again it changed. And after the Cold War, it changed. We had no Soviet Union. We had regimes with as vestiges of Soviet times, the nomenclature is still in place. But in some places, not that much. In Armenia, it's more nationalistic regimes than the communist vestiges or remnants, or Kyrgyzia, another story, which I don't want to go into all those, Ukraine, Georgia, so on and so forth. But and Baltic republics, they were Soviet Union, and we had 3 Baltic republics. Now they are NATO members, EU members, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. And we have 12 more former Soviet republics as having their own flags and seats in different organizations and at the United Nations. And what happened to Yugoslavia? Now we have Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, and we were not relieved by that. We had Kosovo and Montenegro, again, as a separate entity. What the governance is, but the map has changed. Map is different. And Czechs and Slovaks, in a very civilized way, divorced and reunited within the European Union. But they are separate countries. When it comes to Middle East, change occurred on the same lines after the World War I, after the Second World War, only Israel added. Now the Cold War ended, while the Central European and Eurasian map has changed. Middle East, which always followed the changes in the Eurasian map after the World War I and the World War II, did not change this time. As if there are inviolable boulders. They are not. If the Syrian regime collapses, for example, what is the affiliation of the Syrian Kurds living in the most remotest corner of Syria, the region called Al Jazeera, with Kamışlı, Haseki, Amude, down there, Deir ez-Zor, next to Iraq? The border is very fictional, or the Tigris River. And the other side is, again, the Kurds, Iraqi Kurds with their own entity, flag, armed personnel, running their own affairs. So why should those Syrian Kurds look upon remote Damascus to be ruled under Damascus, while they have their Erbil, which they share the same language? Why? I mean, what should attract the Kurds to Damascus but not to Erbil? A functioning Erbil and a dysfunctional Damascus, and much more remote in terms of geography and traditionally also in terms of commerce, economy, and so on. So, what will the tribes on the border, on the eastern and western sides of the Iraqi-Syrian border, both Sunnites, same tribes? One may not have a strong affinity or allegiance to a Shiite rule in Baghdad, and the other has no allegiance to an Alawite rule far away in Latakia or in Damascus or wherever. So, and again, the border is fictional. The same goes for the people in South Syria, around Dera, and Jordan, the same tribes, strong kinship, and no meaningful geographical obstacle that draws the border. You just walk away and you will be reminded, this is Jordan, here is Syria. The same people, the same tribe even, not in terms of ethnicity, the same people. The same ethnicity, yes, Arab, same confession, sect, Sunni, and same tribe. The Shammar tribe in Iraq, for example, a big tribe. It extends from Mosul to Abu Kamal in Syria, the same tribe. Both Sunni, both Arab. One is Syrian, the other is Iraqi. Why? Because it is done by British and French as such before. And then ruled by iron hand, iron fist, by Saddam Hussein or Hafez Assad and so on and so forth. And the international order wanted to keep it as it is. Now, as a loosening international system, with the decline of the unipolar system, and with the development of the progress, not the development of this turbulences and quote-unquote revolution, what will oblige the Syrian and Iraqi or Jordanian Arabs to live apart in different states one's capital would be Baghdad, the others is Damascus, and the third one would be in Amman. But why? I mean, what for? And go and ask your Lebanese friends whether they are Sunni, Maruni, Orthodox, or Alawite, or Druze. So it depends on who the Lebanese is even. Some Lebanese would be Tripoli, Trablus. It's much closer to Homs, and it was the port of Homs historically. The same people. Trablus had no relation with Beirut. Administratively also during the Ottoman times. Trablus was its own administrative unit, and Homs was connected to Trablus. Beirut was somewhere else. Saida was connected to Damascus as Jerusalem. So this separation, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, that will be undone. But of course, these people are not Europeans. They are not as civilized as Slavs. Of course, therefore, the things that took place in the Eastern Europe, which is your main field of interest, similar things might take place. I don't say that it's inevitable. It might or not, but most probably it will. In the Middle East, those things will take place much longer, not only much longer, in a more bloody way than we had witnessed in Yugoslavia, for example. It would be much more painful and difficult. And of course, the difficulty, the pain, the bloodshed will leave its imprint on the following structures. So if we go back to democracy, in the ideal sense of the democracy that we will be talking about is quite a faraway option or project for the people in the Middle East. And when you go and talk to them nowadays, their priority is freedom, not democracy, for example. The magic word is freedom, hurriya. Democracy is a lip service. Means better governance. But first, what they need is freedom. Freedom and democracy are not incompatible, of course, but given the sophistication of your articulated speech, the near future or even the midterm future of the Middle East does not very much fit into the categories which was very helpful for us, actually, these 9 points. The priority is in the Middle East, or the upcoming outcomes of what is taking place will not be a democracy in the Middle East. Far away. So keep on going with the East Europe and former Soviet Union, or jump into Middle East, you will earn your life forever. There will be never a dull period for Middle East.
All right, so I know we don't let Mr. Candar go, but it's time to wrap up, and hopefully he'll come back when we organize these 2 symposiums he suggested in the near future. So thank you so much for the presenters, for their interesting talks, eye-opening discussions, and thank you for your attendance. Well, we'll see you next time.